His hand closed around her wrist like a trap snapping shut. Right there in the middle of the Whitmore Charity Gala, 300 people in black tie, champagne flutes catching light, a string quartet playing something nobody was listening to. Graham Voss grabbed Elara Whitcomb's wrist in front of everyone and smiled like he owned her. "Don't walk away from me. 6 years. 6 years of that voice. 6 years of learning to make herself smaller so he wouldn't get loud." And here he was, engaged to another woman, wearing a ring that wasn't hers, and his hand was on her wrist like the last 6 years hadn't happened at all. If that were you, if someone who destroyed your confidence stood in a room full of people and grabbed you like you were still his, what would you do? Before you find out what Elara did, hit subscribe and stay with us to the very end of this story. Drop a like on this video and tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. We genuinely want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that ballroom. The dress was navy. That was the first thing Elara noticed when she put it on that evening, not how it fit, not how it looked in the mirror, but the memory attached to it. Graham had called it provocative, not a compliment. A warning. She'd folded it into the back of her closet 6 years ago and told herself she'd throw it out eventually. She never did. Maybe she'd wear it again when she was ready. She was ready. The Whitmore Charity Gala was the kind of event that required a certain performance from everyone inside it. You dressed well. You laughed at the right moments. You let the right people see your face. Elara had attended 3 of them as Harrison Caldwell's executive assistant, and she'd gotten good at the performance. She knew which donors preferred to be approached, and which ones preferred to be left alone. She knew how Harrison took his scotch, and which conversations he wanted to be extracted from. She was competent in a way that made her nearly invisible, and for a long time she'd thought that was fine. She was working on reconsidering. That Harrison was across the room near the bar talking to a man Elara recognized from the 3rd floor of their building, some kind of asset manager whose name she kept forgetting. She had her own glass of sparkling water. She didn't drink at work events, another habit she was reconsidering. And she was watching the room with the kind of attention she usually directed at spreadsheets. That was when she saw Graham. He was standing near the east entrance, with a woman Elara didn't recognize. Tall, blonde, wearing something that cost more than Elara's monthly rent. The woman was laughing at something Graham had said, and Graham was smiling the way he always smiled in public, easy, confident, like he was doing the room a favor by being in it. Elara's stomach dropped. She did a very fast calculation. Distance to the nearest exit, whether Graham had seen her yet, whether she could get across the room and out the door before he looked up. She had done this kind of calculation before. She had done it in grocery stores, in coffee shops, twice in the lobby of her own building when she thought she saw his car parked outside. She was tired of doing that calculation. She stayed where she was. That was her first mistake, or maybe her first act of courage. She still couldn't tell the difference with any reliability. She stayed and she finished her sparkling water, and she watched Graham across the room until he finally glanced up and found her. His expression changed in a way only Elara would have recognized. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't guilt, it was something more like satisfaction, the particular satisfaction of someone who has been looking for something and found it exactly where he expected. He said something to the blonde woman and excused himself. Elara set her glass down on a nearby table and turned to go find Harrison. She didn't make it 3 steps, Elara. His voice hadn't changed. That was the thing about abusers, the voice never changed. The context changed. The circumstances changed. The relationship ended, and the years passed, and you rebuilt yourself from the floor up. And then you heard that voice in a crowded ballroom, and every inch of progress you made tried to fold back on itself. She stopped because stopping was a reflex. She hated that it was a reflex. She turned around because she was trying to be a woman who stopped running. Graham looked exactly the same. That was almost offensive. Splitting. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly, and his hair was slightly longer than she remembered, and there was an ease to his posture that told her his engagement had been good for him. Of course it had. He'd had her to practice on. "You look good," he said. "Graham."
"I heard you were working for Harrison Caldwell."
Good for you, he said it, the way you'd compliment a child who'd finally managed to tie their shoes. I always knew you'd land somewhere decent. I need to get back to. I'm not done talking to you, that sentence. Those 6 words. She had heard them more times than she could count, at dinner tables and in parking lots and in their she'd shared apartment when she'd tried to go to sleep and he'd wanted to continue an argument that she had already lost. I'm not done talking to you, as though her leaving required his permission, as though she was a conversation that only ended when he decided. Turned to walk away, his hand closed around her wrist. 300 people, champagne and string music, and the low hum of money-changing hands, and Graham Voss's fingers wrapped around Elara Whitcomb's wrist like she was still his. Don't walk away from me. Her heart was doing something complicated. Her mouth was dry. She was calculating again, not the exit this time, but how loudly she could speak before it became a scene, whether a scene would hurt Harrison's business, whether anyone nearby was paying attention, whether any of it mattered more than the fact that his hand was on her, and she did not want his hand on her. Let go of my, you should have called me back. He wasn't even looking at her face. He was looking at the room around her, scanning it the way he always did when he spoke to her in public, making sure no one important was watching, managing the periphery, multitasking the conversation while she stood in the middle of it and tried to matter. Graham, let go. You made this into something dramatic. I just want to talk. He had always done that, reframed her discomfort as overreaction, her resistance as drama, her clarity as confusion. 6 years of it had taught her to doubt every feeling she's had, to run every emotion through a filter of, am I being reasonable before she allowed herself to express it? And even now, with his hand on her wrist, in a room full of strangers, some small and battered part of her was still running the filter. She was pulling the filter out. Take your hand off me. Elara, sir. The voice came from beside her. Elara had not heard him approach. She didn't know how that was possible. The man was not built to go unnoticed, but somehow Silas Blackthorne had materialized at her left shoulder without announcing himself, and now he was standing close enough that his arm almost touched hers, looking at Graham Voss with an expression that contained no warmth whatsoever. He was tall. That was the first thing. He was several inches taller than Graham, with the kind of build that suggested discipline rather than vanity, broad through the shoulders, unhurried in his posture, dressed in a dark suit that was expensive without advertising itself. He had dark hair going slightly gray at the temples and eyes that were doing something. Elara couldn't immediately categorize, not threatening exactly, but deeply, quietly certain. He was looking at Graham's hand on her wrist. The lady asked you to let go. Graham's jaw tightened. He looked at Silas the way men who are accustomed to being the most powerful person in a room look at the first person who challenges that assumption with irritation and a fast, involuntary recalculation. This is a private conversation, was Silas said. Just that was. Graham released her wrist, not because he wanted to. Elara could see that clearly the way his fingers opened, slowly, deliberately, making the release itself into a statement. He released her wrist because the math had shifted, and he knew it. Then Silas turned to her. She expected him to say something reassuring. Something along the lines of, "Are you all right?" or "I saw what was happening," or "Let me know if you need anything." Something that would allow her to decline gracefully and walk away and process all of this in private. Instead, he said, "Take my arm." That was it. Not a question. Not quite an order. Something in between, delivered quietly, with enough space in it for her to say no. She looked at him. She had no idea who he was. He was a stranger in a room full of strangers, and she was a woman who had spent 6 years learning not to trust the instincts she used to rely on. She took his arm. Later, she would ask herself why. She would replay that moment many times, examining it from different angles, trying to isolate the logic. The honest answer was that there wasn't one. Some part of her, the part that had worn the navy dress tonight, the part that was tired of calculating exits, recognized something in Silas Blackthorne's expression that had nothing to do with ownership or rescue or control. He wasn't offering to save her. He was offering her a direction. She was the one who decided to move. They walked across the ballroom together. Elara was aware of the room in a way she wasn't usually aware of rooms. She could feel the shift in attention, the small adjustments, as people noticed Silas moving through the crowd. Not because he demanded it, he didn't glance around, didn't perform, but because there was something about him that made the room reorganize itself around his presence. She didn't know what to call it. Gravity, maybe. She looked back once. Graham was still standing where they'd left him. His jaw was set and his eyes were following her across the room, and the expression on his face was the one she knew better than any other. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't jealousy. It was the face of someone watching something move out of reach that he was certain still belonged to him. It made her stomach turn, and underneath that, something she hadn't felt in a long time, something hot and clean and pointed. Anger. Silas guided her through a side door into a quieter corridor. The noise of the gala dropped behind them like a curtain. He released her arm and took a half-step back, putting space between them without being asked to, which was the kind of detail she noticed. "You okay?" "I don't know your name," she said. "Silas Blackthorne." She knew that name. She'd seen it in financial pages, in the kind of articles that used phrases like rumored connections and law enforcement sources suggest. She'd heard it in Harrison's office once, during a phone call. Harrison had ended quickly when he realized she was still at her desk. Yes. He said it the same way he'd said was to Graham. No elaboration, no apology. Just acknowledgement. "Why did you help me?" Silas looked at her steadily. "Because he had his hand on you, and you told him to let go." "That's it?" "That's enough." Elara was quiet for a moment. She was trying to decide what to do with this, with him, with the last 10 minutes, with the anger that was still burning somewhere in her chest, beneath all the years of trained composure. "He's going to make trouble," she said finally. "For you? For my job, for Harrison. Graham knows people. He knows how to use information." She paused. "He's done it before." Silas nodded slowly, not surprised. Absorbing. "He's engaged," she said. She wasn't sure why she said it, maybe just to confirm it out loud, to make it real. "To the woman I saw him with. I saw her. So this isn't about getting me back." She was thinking out loud now, following the logic the way she followed financial discrepancies, tracing the line from one point to the next. "He doesn't want me. He just doesn't want me to be outside his control." Silas was watching her. "That's a precise way to put it. I spent 6 years learning how he thinks." He didn't say anything to that. Which was, Elara thought, exactly right. There was nothing adequate to say to it, and he seemed to understand that. Her phone buzzed. "Harrison, everything all right? Saw Graham Voss speak to you. Do I need to be concerned?" She typed back, "I'm fine. Nothing to worry about." Then she put the phone away and looked at Silas. "Thank you," she said, "for earlier. Don't thank me yet." "Why not?" He was quiet for exactly long enough that she understood he was choosing his words. "'Cause I know who Graham Voss is. Not personally, but professionally," he paused. "And the name on some of the legal documents I've been looking at for the last few weeks, it's his." Elara went very still. "What documents?" Silas looked at her. Something passed across his expression, not reluctance exactly, but the particular restraint of a person deciding how much to say. "That's a longer conversation," he said, "and this isn't the right place for it." She studied him, a mafia boss in a charity ballroom, telling her there was a longer conversation. A week ago, she would have walked away from that sentence. A month ago, she was trying to figure out if she was walking toward it now, because her judgment had genuinely improved, or because tonight had rattled something loose. "Give me your number," she said. He did, without being asked twice. She went back into the ballroom, found Harrison, and spent the next 90 minutes doing exactly what she was paid to do, reading the room, managing introductions, anticipating needs before they were expressed. She was good at it. She had always been good at it. Graham had told her once that her professional competence was the only thing she had going for her, and she had believed him for longer than she should have. She did not see Graham again that night, but she felt him. The way you feel a bruise in the dark not looking at it, just aware of it, aware that it's there. By midnight, she was in a cab heading uptown with her coat in her lap and Silas Blackthorne's number in her phone, and the distinct uncomfortable sensation that the evening had not ended so much as redirected itself. The navy dress was still exactly the right choice. The following morning, 3 gossip columns had photographs. She didn't read them until she was already on her second coffee, sitting at her kitchen table in the apartment she had chosen herself and paid for herself and decorated herself, piece by piece, over the 18 months since she'd walked out of Graham's life with 2 bags and a level of determination that had surprised even her. The photographs were taken from across the ballroom. She was looking straight ahead, not smiling, Silas's arm solid under her hand. Silas looked like he always looked. Apparently, the articles describing him had a consistent quality of trying to make him legible and failing. Blackthorne, whose family connections to organized crime have been reported but never prosecuted. The enigmatic financier who moves between the legitimate and shadow economies with apparent ease. She set her phone face down and finished her coffee. Then it buzzed. Not Harrison. Not Silas. Graham, I see you found yourself a protector. Careful who you trust, Elara. Some people make very bad enemies. She read it twice, then screenshotted it and set the phone down. The anger was back, different from last night. Last night it had been sharp and hot. This morning it was slower, more considered. She recognized it as the feeling she got when she found a discrepancy in a financial statement, the slow certainty that something was wrong, that the numbers didn't add up, that someone was hiding something, and she was going to find it. She called Silas. He picked up on the second ring. He texted me this morning, I know. A beat. He called 2 journalists in the last hour. I keep track of things that affect my interests. She didn't ask him to define his interests. Not yet. He's telling people I'm unstable, she said, that my judgment is compromised, that my association with you is going to be a liability for Harrison. Yes, he's not trying to win me back, she said. He's trying to make me unemployable. He's trying to make you come back to him to make it stop. She sat with that for a moment. The logic was so clean. So Graham, he had always understood leverage better than love, had probably mistaken one for the other for so long that the distinction had stopped mattering to him. What do you want, she asked Silas. From you? From this. Whatever this is. You helped me last night. You know something about Graham and some documents. You're paying attention to what he does this morning. You clearly have an interest here. What is it? There was a long pause. Long enough that she started to regret asking. I have a problem, he said finally. Graham is connected to it. You have access to information that might help me understand the full shape of it. And I think his fixation on you gives us both leverage we wouldn't otherwise have. Us, she said. If you want there to be. She got up and went to the window. 7th floor, looking east. The city was doing its morning thing, delivering, commuting, arguing, running indifferent to Elara Whitcomb, standing at her window trying to decide whether trusting a mafia boss was better or worse than letting Graham Voss grind her into the ground professionally. I want conditions, she said. Name them. I keep my apartment. I keep my job. I make my own financial decisions, and I don't ask your permission for any of them. And if I decide I'm done, I walk away. No questions. Yes, she waited for the negotiation, for the but or the within reason, or the careful repositioning of terms she'd seen Graham perform 100 times. Didn't come. That's it, she said. You named your conditions. I agreed to them. She turned away from the window. Then we have a conversation, she said. Not an arrangement. Not yet. A conversation when? Today. Somewhere I've never been before and you haven't arranged. Pause. Then something almost like amusement in his voice. There's a coffee shop on 43rd and 9th. Corner table in the back. An hour? She said yes. She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment, in the apartment that was hers, in the city that had watched her put herself back together, wearing yesterday's pajamas and carrying a feeling she couldn't quite name. Not hope. She'd learned to be careful with hope. Something harder than hope. More structural. The feeling of someone who has identified a problem and is now, finally, beginning to formulate a plan. She went to get dressed, not because anyone was expecting her to, because she had somewhere to be. The coffee shop on 43rd and 9th was the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying. Scuffed linoleum floors, A chalkboard menu that hadn't been fully erased in years. The particular smell of burnt coffee and old wood that meant nobody was performing anything for anybody. Elara approved of it immediately. Silas was already at the corner table when she arrived. He had a black coffee in front of him, and nothing else, no phone on the table, no open laptop, no newspaper folded to signal casual. Just the coffee and his hands, and the same quality of stillness she'd noticed in the ballroom. Like a man who had learned a long time ago that movement was expensive. She sat down across from him without taking off her coat. "You were early," she said. "I'm always early. Control thing?" He looked at her, habit. She ordered a coffee from the woman who appeared at her elbow, black, same as his. And then she put both hands flat on the table and looked at Silas Blackthorne in the gray morning light of a corner table that smelled like burnt grounds and said, "Tell me about the documents." He told her. Not everything she understood that immediately, could feel the shape of what he was leaving out the same way she could feel a gap in a financial report. But what he gave her was substantial. For the past 8 months, someone had been running a series of acquisition bids through Caldwell Capital, not through Harrison directly, but through the layers of consultants and brokers and third-party advisors that surrounded any organization of that size. Shell companies, quiet purchases, legal structures designed to obscure ownership chains. And Graham's firm appears in the paperwork, she said. 7 times in the last 18 months. As what? Counsel of record on 4 of them, as a named associate on the others. She absorbed that. That's not necessarily criminal. No, Silas agreed. It's not by itself, but the shell companies lead somewhere, and where they lead. He stopped, picked up his coffee, set it down again without drinking. They lead somewhere that connects to me, to my organization's legitimate holdings, to accounts I did not authorize and transactions I did not approve. Elara looked at him steadily. Someone is using your name. Someone is using my structure. My organization has legitimate financial holdings, real estate, logistics, a charitable foundation that's been in operation for 12 years. Whoever designed this operation built inside those structures. Used them as cover. His jaw moved. I've been trying to find the entry point for 6 weeks. And you think the entry point is connected to Graham. I think Graham is the access. He's been moving legal documents through enough legitimate firms that it looks like ordinary corporate work. But the pattern is consistent, and the structures are sophisticated, and somebody designed all of this who understood both corporate law and how to hide money. Elara sat back. Her coffee arrived. She wrapped both hands around the cup. Why are you telling me this? Because you have access to Caldwell's filing systems. Because you're intelligent enough to understand what you're looking at. And because Graham has apparently decided you're a weakness he can exploit, which means he's going to keep pushing until he gets what he wants or until something stops him. And you'd like to be what stops him. I'd like us both to understand what we're actually dealing with. She studied him, the gray at his temples, the way his hands rested on the table still, but not tense, the hands of someone who'd learned the difference between readiness and aggression. What are you not telling me? She said. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. Something more like reassessment. More than I should be keeping back, he said. But not yet. I need to verify something first. That's not acceptable. I know. If you want my help, if you want access to anything I know, or anything I can find, I need the full picture. Not the version you've decided I can handle. It's not about what you can handle. Then what's it about? He was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop moved around them, a man at the counter arguing mildly about his order, 2 women near the window with laptops, the sound of the street bleeding through the glass. If I tell you everything, Silas said, and I'm wrong about what's happening then, I've put information in your hands that could be dangerous to you. Dangerous to your position. Dangerous to your safety. And if you're right, then it's dangerous anyway. But at least you'd have the full map. Elara drank her coffee. It was too hot and slightly over-extracted, and exactly what she needed. Give me a week, she said. I'll look at what I can legitimately access through my position. Not steal anything, not break anything. Just look at what's already in front of me and tell you what I see. And in exchange, you deal with Graham. not violently. She held his eyes. I'm not asking you to hurt him. I'm asking you to make him understand that the pressure campaign needs to stop. And if he doesn't stop, then we talk about next steps. Together, Silas nodded once. She stood, put her coat back on, and picked up her bag. One more thing, she said. I looked you up this morning. Everything I could find publicly. And I know who you are. What you are. I'm not pretending I don't. She looked at him directly. I also know that what you did last night in that ballroom, stepping in, giving me a choice. Stepping back when it was done, that's not nothing. But it doesn't make us even. It doesn't make you safe. It doesn't make any of this simple. I know that. Good. She picked up her coffee to go. Don't call me. I'll call you. She walked out of the coffee shop into the cold morning air and did not look back. The first thing she did when she got to Caldwell Capital was smile at the security desk, take the elevator to the 14th floor, hang up her coat, and open her computer. The second thing she did was pull up 18 months of acquisition documentation and start reading. It took her 4 days. 4 days of arriving early and staying late, of cross-referencing filing dates and legal counsel registrations, of building a private map on actual paper. Nothing digital she didn't trust of every transaction that had a pattern she didn't like. She was careful. She touched nothing she wasn't already authorized to access. She left no search trails she wouldn't be able to explain. She was, in the language of the financial industry, conducting a routine internal review. She was also finding something that made her stomach progressively colder with every page. On the 5th day, Harrison called her into his office. He was standing at the window when she came in, which was never a good sign. Harrison sat at his desk when things were fine. He stood at the window when he was preparing to say something he'd already decided. Close the door, he said. She did. I've been getting calls, he said, still looking out the window. From 3 different people in the last 48 hours, all saying variations of the same thing. Elara waited. That your judgment has been compromised. That your personal associations have become a liability. He turned around. Harrison Caldwell was 61 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of a face that had spent decades learning to reveal very little. Right now it was revealing something she read as discomfort. That I should review your access levels while the situation is assessed. Graham Voss, she said. Harrison was quiet. He contacted you directly or he used intermediaries? Harrison? A pause. Intermediaries. 2 of them. One is a board member. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited. Her back was straight and her hands were in her lap, and she was running through a very fast internal inventory of what she felt, which turned out to be primarily anger and secondarily something sad and tired and deeply unsurprised. I have worked for you for 8 months, she said. In that time, I have not made a single significant error. I have managed 2 acquisitions, cleaned up the documentation on a 3rd that was in a mess before I arrived, and I have never once given you a reason to question my judgment on anything that actually mattered. I know that. Then I need you to tell me what you told them. Harrison sat down. He pressed his hands together on the desk in a way that made him look briefly like a much older man. I told them I would look into it, he said. I didn't agree with anything they said. I didn't commit to any action, but I said I would look into it. That's not nothing. No, it's not, he met her eyes. Who is Silas Blackthorne to you? Someone I met at the gala. Someone who helped me out of a situation. What situation? She held his gaze. Graham grabbed my wrist in the middle of the ballroom and told me I wasn't allowed to walk away from him. Harrison went very still, and Silas Blackthorne intervened. Yes, and the photographs are of me walking across a room with a man who helped me. Not a relationship, not an arrangement, a single walk across a ballroom. Harrison was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Elara could hear the ventilation system and a phone ringing 2 offices down and the distant percussion of the city outside the glass. I should have asked you directly, he said finally. Before I said I'd look into anything. Yes, you should have. Another silence. Different quality this time. Is there anything I need to know about? He asked. About Blackthorne. About Graham. About anything you might have noticed in the course of your work here that Not yet, she said. Give me a few more days. He nodded. She stood up and went back to her desk. That evening, her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Silence on the line for 3 seconds. Then a voice she didn't know, male, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't place immediately. Mid-Atlantic, maybe. Old money. The voice of someone accustomed to speaking and being heard. Ms. Whitcomb, I apologize for calling without introduction. My name is Bennett Crow. She stood very still in the middle of her apartment. I understand you've been spending time with Silas Blackthorne, Crow said. I wanted to make contact before that relationship progressed any further. There are things about Mr. Blackthorne you should know. Things that affect your safety and your professional future. How did you get this number? Graham Voss provided it. She sat down. Not because her legs gave out, because she needed to think, and she thought better when she was still. What do you want, Mr. Crow? A conversation, nothing more. I think if you understood the full scope of what Blackthorne's organization has been doing, you'd make different choices about your associations. I make my own choices. Of course. I'm simply offering information. Why? A pause. Brief, polished, rehearsed. Because you're an intelligent woman in a difficult position, and I believe intelligent women deserve accurate information. She almost laughed. She almost said what she was thinking, which was that she had heard that sentence more various forms, and it had never once meant what it claimed to mean. I'll think about it, she said. Of course. Take your time, a beat. Though I'd suggest not too much time. Things are moving rather quickly. He hung up. She sat in her apartment for 60 seconds. Then she called Silas. Bennett Crow just called me. 3 seconds of silence. Very different from Crow's silence. This one felt like something tightening. On what number? My personal cell. Graham gave it to him. Another pause. Are you home? Yes. Don't open your door for anyone in the next hour. I'm sending someone to your building. Before she could respond, not to watch you. To watch the street. There's a difference. Silas. I know. I'll explain when I can. Did Crow say what he wanted? Conversation. Said he had information about you. Said things were moving quickly. He's right about that last part. She heard something in the background movement. A door. Someone else's voice, low and indistinct. Then Silas again. He called you, because Graham told him you were our point of contact. He's trying to flip you. Flip me. Get you to pull back. Give him information. Or at minimum, get you frightened enough to stop looking at whatever you've been looking at. She breathed. How do you know I've been looking at anything? Because it's what you said you'd do. And because if I were you, I'd already have found 2 things that don't make sense. She looked at the paper map on her kitchen table. 3, she said quietly. Silence. Then send me nothing, not yet. Wait until we meet. Tomorrow morning. Same place. Agreed. She hung up and sat in the quiet of her apartment with her paper map and her cold coffee and the feeling that the situation she had walked into was significantly larger than it had appeared at the entrance. This was the thing about conspiracies that no thriller ever quite captured accurately. They didn't feel dramatic when you found them. They felt like paperwork. They felt like dates that didn't match, and names that appeared in columns where they shouldn't, and a slowly building sense of wrongness that made your eyes hurt, and your neck tense, and your sleep bad. She folded the paper map and put it inside a book on her shelf. Not hidden, just filed. Then she went to check that her door was locked. The next morning came with rain. She got to the coffee shop 8 minutes early and found Silas already there, which no longer surprised her. He looked like he hadn't slept, which surprised her slightly. She'd assumed he was the kind of person who slept fine regardless of circumstances. There was a tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and when he looked up as she sat down, the look he gave her was the kind that carried information before words did. Arthur Bellamy, he said. Who, my senior accountant? He's been running the audit on our legitimate holdings, trying to map the full extent of what was done inside our structure without authorization. He wrapped both hands around his coffee. He didn't come into the office yesterday. He's not answering his phone. Elara went still. How long? 36 hours since anyone has had contact. Police filed a report this morning. They're treating it as voluntary absence for now. He paused. It's not. She looked at him. You're sure? Arthur has worked for me for 11 years. He has a wife and a daughter, and he calls his mother every Sunday. He's never missed a day of work without advance notice. He's not absent voluntarily. Crow. Or someone working for Crow. She pressed her lips together, thought. If someone took him because he was getting close to something. Then whatever he found is either somewhere on his person or somewhere I can't access yet. Or both. What was he close to? Silas was quiet for a moment in a way she was beginning to recognize as decision-making rather than evasion. He identified a physical location, he said. A logistics warehouse near the Brooklyn waterfront. Shell company ownership, 3 layers deep. But the chain of ownership leads back to one of the same structures that appears in your Caldwell documentation. She leaned forward. He was going to investigate it. He was going to give me the address and let me decide how to handle it. And now he's gone. Yes. She sat back. The rain was hitting the window in long diagonal sheets. Coffee shop was fuller than it had been the day they first met. People coming in, damp and loud and irritable. The corner table was still quiet, still theirs. This is the part, she said slowly, where you tell me something you've been not telling me. He met her eyes. I knew about the Caldwell connection before the gala, he said. She held very still. I knew that whoever was running this operation had been using Caldwell Capital as a transit point. I didn't know how deep it went, or who the internal access was. I didn't know it was connected to Graham until about 2 weeks before the gala. He paused. And I didn't know you existed until I saw him put his hand on your wrist. The room was very loud suddenly, or she was very quiet. She wasn't sure which. You went to the gala because of the investigation. I attend events like that regularly. It's part of how my legitimate operation functions. He paused. But yes, I was also watching for anything connected to Caldwell. And Graham. And when you saw him grab me, I saw someone connected to a criminal financial operation grabbing a woman who works for the company that operation is using. He stopped. And I saw a man who knew exactly what he was doing and enjoyed it. She breathed. In, out. You should have told me this at the beginning. Yes, that's not an excuse. I know it's not. You kept me in a partial picture. You let me start digging through Caldwell's files without knowing the full scope of what I was looking for. She stopped herself, looked at the table, looked back up. I told you at the start. I said I don't work with incomplete information. You did, and you agreed. And then I withheld information anyway. His voice didn't shift, no defensiveness, no performance of remorse. Just acknowledgement. I can tell you I thought I was protecting you. I can tell you I needed to verify certain things before I spoke. Both of those things are true. Neither of them is the whole reason. What's the rest of it? A pause. Long and real and not rehearsed. I wasn't sure you'd stay involved if you knew the full scope, he said. And I needed you involved. She looked at him for a long time. That, she said quietly, is exactly what Graham used to do. He flinched. It was small and fast, and she almost missed it. But she didn't miss it. I know, he said. She stood up, picked up her coat, didn't put it on, just held it. I'm going to go home, she said, and I'm going to look at my paper map. And then I'm going to decide whether I believe the difference between you withholding information to manipulate me and you withholding information because you made a bad decision under pressure is large enough to matter. He didn't try to stop her, didn't argue, didn't offer anything else. She was almost to the door when she stopped, turned back. The warehouse, she said, the one Arthur identified. Do you have the address? Yes. Send it to me. The information only. Nothing else. She walked out into the rain. She spent 3 hours at home with her paper map and the warehouse address Silas sent, single line, no message attached. She cross-referenced it against the Caldwell documents she had memorized, not written down. Memorized because she was careful and found it. Not the warehouse address exactly, but a company name. A name that appeared in the Caldwell paperwork as a logistics coordinator on a failed acquisition and appeared in Silas's organizational records as a flagged external contractor. The same name, in 2 different systems, connected to a warehouse in Brooklyn. And somewhere in that warehouse or connected to it was a man named Arthur Bellamy, who knew something important enough that someone had taken him to make him stop knowing it. She picked up her phone, called Silas. He answered in one ring. I found the link, she said. Silence. Then where? Caldwell's failed acquisition from 14 months ago. The logistics contractor listed as the third-party facilitator. She paused. The name matches one of the flagged contractors in the records you shared with me. She heard his breathing change. That means the operation was running through Caldwell before you and I were ever in the same room, she said. Which means Graham was targeting Caldwell specifically. Which means your position was never incidental, Silas said. She sat with that. He came after my job, she said quietly. Not because he was jealous. Not because he wanted me back. He came after my job because I was already inside the building they needed access to. Yes, he spent 6 years controlling me so that when he needed a lever inside a specific organization, he had one ready. Her voice was flat. Not shaking. She was past shaking. He built me into an asset. Elara, don't, she breathed. Don't tell me it's not my fault. I know it's not my fault. I'm not upset about fault. I'm upset because I need to think about what happens next, and I can't do that while someone is trying to manage my emotions. He went quiet immediately. She stood up and walked to her window. Rain had stopped. The street below was wet and reflective. Every light doubled on the pavement. Arthur has the evidence, she said. Whatever he found, the complete chain, the full ownership structure, the documentation that connects everything, he either has it with him or he put it somewhere before they took him. We need to find him. The warehouse, she said. If they took him somewhere controlled, it would be somewhere they already own. Somewhere off the books. Somewhere that looks empty. I can send people. If you send people and Graham is there, if Graham is connected to who's holding Arthur, he'll know immediately. He'll move Arthur. He'll destroy the evidence. She was thinking out loud, fast, the way she thought when she was deep inside a problem. Graham's only remaining leverage is his access to me. His obsession with controlling me is the one thing nobody can fully predict or plan around. A long silence. You're thinking about going in yourself, Silas said. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking that Graham has spent 6 years trying to control me, and that the one thing he was never prepared for was me using his fixation against him. She paused. He wants to see me afraid. He wants to see me asking for help. If I walk into that warehouse, if I make him think I've come to negotiate, to give him something. No. The word was hard and immediate. Absolutely not. It's not your decision. Elara, is it your decision? A beat. A long one. The sound of him understanding that she was right and hating that she was right. No, he said finally. Then help me plan it properly, she said. Because I'm going whether you help me or not, and it will go better if you help me. The silence that followed was the kind that meant a door had closed and another one was opening, and whatever was on the other side of it, neither of them could take back once they walked through. Come to my office, Silas said. She was already putting on her coat. Silas's office was not what she expected. She had constructed a version of it in her head during the cab ride, something designed to communicate power, all dark wood and leather, and the kind of art that costs more than it means anything. What she found instead was a large, plainly furnished room on the 31st floor of a building in Midtown that housed 3 separate legitimate businesses. The desk was wide and practical. The bookshelves held actual books, marked and handled, not arranged. The one window faced north, and the view was other buildings, not a panorama. There was a whiteboard on the east wall covered in financial diagrams that someone had partially erased. It looked like the office of someone who worked in it. 2 men were already in the room when Elara arrived. Clocked them immediately, one near the door, one near the window, both built and both quiet in the particular way of people who were paid to be quiet and capable. Neither of them acknowledged her. Silas introduced neither of them. They were furniture that could move, and everyone understood that. Silas had a city map spread across the desk. The warehouse, he said, without preamble. Arthur identified it 4 days ago. He sent me the ownership chain the morning before he disappeared. He pointed. Here, western edge of the Red Hook waterfront. The building is registered to a logistics company called Meridian Transit Solutions. Meridian is owned by a holding company in Delaware. That holding company's registered agent is a law firm. Graham's firm, Elara said. An affiliate. 1 degree removed. He looked at her. But yes. She studied the map. How big is the building? Single-story warehouse, approximately 12,000 square feet. Loading bays on the south side. 1 main entrance, 2 emergency exits. There's a mezzanine office level along the north wall that's where the security panel and the internal communications would be. Cameras, exterior only, according to the city permit records. But permit records and actual installation don't always match. She nodded. Security presence? Unknown. That's the problem. He straightened. If I send a team in to surveil the perimeter and Graham has someone watching, which he will, then Arthur gets moved before we can establish whether he's there. And if he's not there, we've lost the element of surprise for nothing. Yes. She looked at the map for another moment. Then she looked up at Silas. I need everything you have on Graham's current communication patterns, she said. Phone records, if you have them. Any contact you've been able to track between him and Crow in the last 72 hours. Silas opened a folder on the desk and slid it toward her. She spent 40 minutes with it, standing, not sitting, reading the way she read financial documents fast, total pulling threads. Silas stood to the side and let her work, which she appreciated more than she said. The 2 men near the door and window remained where they were. Nobody offered her coffee. When she finished, she closed the folder. Graham has made 4 calls to a number registered to a shell entity in the last 48 hours, she said. All between 9 and 11 at night, all under 4 minutes. She tapped the folder. He's checking in, not planning checking in, which means he's not running the warehouse operation himself. He's a middleman. Crow, Silas said. Crow, and whoever Crow has on the ground at that location, she paused. Graham's fixation on me, Crow knows about it. Crow called me specifically because Graham told him about me, which means Graham has been talking to Crow about me as a variable, as a problem, or as a tool, or as both. She looked at the map one more time. Then at Silas. I want an encrypted transmitter, small enough to carry without it being found in a pat-down unless someone knows exactly what they're looking for. Silas was quiet. I also want a dead man trigger, she said. Set to a server that releases everything Arthur's documents, the ownership chains, everything you have, to a specific detective, unless I cancel it every 2 hours. She met his eyes. If something goes wrong, the evidence gets out regardless. That's my guarantee. That's also my leverage inside the building. Who's the detective? Miles Rourke, Financial Crimes Unit. I've read enough about him in the Caldwell files to know he's been investigating the shell company structures for 8 months independently. He's close. He just doesn't have the complete chain yet. She paused. We give him the chain, whether I walk out of that warehouse or not. Silas's jaw tightened. Not in refusal, in the particular tightness of a man processing something he doesn't like and has already decided to accept. You understand what you're walking into, he said. No, she said honestly. Not completely, but I understand what I'd be leaving behind if I didn't walk in. And that's worse. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once and turned to one of the silent men near the window. They spent the rest of that evening planning. It was not a dramatic process. It involved maps and communication protocols and contingency chains and the kind of methodical conversation that left no room for anything cinematic. Elara appreciated that too. She had spent 6 years with a man who performed everything anger, affection, decisions, apologies. There was something almost physically relieving about a room full of people who were just trying to solve a problem. She went home at 11, set an alarm for 2:30. She did not sleep well, but she slept enough, which was all she needed. Warehouse 3 in the morning smelled like rust and standing water and something chemical underneath both. Elara moved through the side entrance. Silas's contact had identified a loading door with a broken latch that had been broken long enough that nobody had bothered to fix it. She had the transmitter in the lining of her jacket. She had the dead man trigger active on a secondary phone in her inside pocket. She had memorized the building layout, and she had memorized 3 exit routes, and she had memorized what she was going to say when she found Graham. She found Arthur first. He was in the mezzanine office, zip-tied to a chair with his wrists in front of him and a cut above his left eye that had dried into a dark line down his cheekbone. He was conscious. He looked up when she came through the door, and his expression did something complicated: relief and fear, and the particular shame of someone who has been helpless and doesn't know how to be seen that way. "Elara Whitcomb," he said. His voice was rougher than she imagined it. "Silas said someone would come. He didn't say it would be me. He said he wasn't sure you'd be the one." A pause. "He was hoping you wouldn't be." She was already at his wrists, working on the zip tie with the small cutter she'd brought. "Are you hurt anywhere else, Ribs? They weren't careful when they brought me in." He winced as his hands came free. "I've got 2 cracked, I think. Not broken. Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then we need to move the documents," he said immediately. "The full chain. I put it on an encrypted drive before they took me. I knew they were coming. I had about 4 minutes. I hid it in the building." She stopped. "Where?" "Behind the fire suppression panel on the north wall. Ground level. I knew they wouldn't touch it. I need to get you out first. If we leave without it." "Arthur," he stopped. "I know about the drive. We planned for it." She kept her voice level. "Silas set up the dead man server. Everything gets released to Detective Rourke if I don't cancel the trigger. The drive is insurance, not the only copy." She looked at him. "You hid the important things. Now let me get you out." He nodded. It was shaky, getting to his feet, the ribs, she thought, or the 2 days without proper rest, or both. She steadied him with a hand on his arm, and they moved toward the door. They didn't make it. The lights in the mezzanine came on. Not the overhead fluorescents, a set of portable work lights someone had set up along the railing, the kind used at construction sites, flooding the space with white industrial light that made every shadow suddenly stark and every face suddenly readable. Elara stopped. Arthur stopped. Her hand tightened on his arm. Graham was standing at the top of the mezzanine stairs. He was wearing dark clothes. Dark clothes, and he had 3 men behind him, all of them holding weapons they weren't pointing yet, which was the kind of restraint that communicated confidence rather than hesitation. Graham himself wasn't holding anything. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at Elara the way he had always looked at her when he'd caught her doing something he'd decided she wasn't allowed to do. Not angry, satisfied. "I knew you'd come," he said. She did not move. She did not speak. She was calculating distances, angles, the location of the 3 exit routes she'd memorized, how fast Arthur could move with cracked ribs. "I told Bennett you'd come," Graham continued. "He thought it would take longer to draw you in." "I told him, not Elara. Elara runs toward problems. It's her worst habit." He tilted his head slightly. "Or her best one, depending on your perspective." "Graham?" Her voice came out flat and steady, which surprised her. "You look better than you did at the gala," he said. "More like yourself. The real self, not the one you put on for Caldwell's benefit." He started walking toward her, unhurried, hands still at his sides. "I've always thought you were extraordinary, Elara. That was never the issue. Stop walking." He stopped. Not because she told him to, she could see that plainly. Because he chose to. "Where's the evidence?" he said. "What evidence?" "Don't." His voice stayed pleasant, but something shifted behind it. "We've been watching you for 3 days. We know you've been inside Caldwell's files. We know you've been building a map. We know you met with Blackthorne twice. We know you came here tonight with a plan." He paused. "You're not here to rescue Arthur. You're here to get the drive." She looked at him steadily. "Arthur doesn't have a drive." "I know he doesn't. He hid it." Graham glanced at Arthur briefly, the glance you give furniture. "We searched him thoroughly when we brought him in. It's somewhere in the building. Then you don't need me. I need you to give me what's on Blackthorne's server." He took one more step toward her. "The compiled financial records, the ownership chains, communications you've been sent. I don't have server access." "Elara." He said her name the way he used to say it, at the end of an argument she was losing, with patience, with a kind of sorrowful certainty, as though the gap between her understanding and his was simply a matter of time. "I know you. 6 years, I know when you're stalling." "And I know you," she said. 6 years, I know when you're scared." His expression shifted, fractionally, but she saw it. You're not in control here, she said. You think you are, but Crow is. And Crow will remove you the minute you stop being useful, which is the same thing you were planning to do to me. That's not, you built me into an asset, she said. That's what this was, the relationship, the control. The 6 years of making me smaller and more compliant and more dependent. You were building a tool for the moment you needed access to somewhere I'd eventually work. She held his gaze. How long did you know about Caldwell Capital? Before we were even together. Something happened in Graham's face that she had never seen before. Not guilt, she didn't think Graham was capable of guilt in any form she'd recognize. Something more like being splitting, discomfort and seen, the discomfort of his life carefully managing the perceptions of everyone around him, and has just been accurately perceived. That's not how it started, he said, but it's how it ended. Elara, don't say my name like that. She took a step forward, which surprised him. She could see it in the small readjustment of his posture, the barely perceptible lean back. Don't say my name like I'm still the person you made. I'm not. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. Then Graham said quietly, Give me what's on the server. No. You don't understand what Crow is capable of. Give me Arthur, and let us walk out of here, she said. That's the only offer I'm making. Graham looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the men behind him. Then he looked back at Elara, and his expression closed like a door. Take her phone, he said. 2 things happened at once. Graham's men toward her. One of Graham's men moved toward her, and Elara pressed the cancel secondary phone, not because she was surrendering, but because she had 4 hours remaining on the current window, and she needed that time intact. They took both phones. She had expected this. She had also expected that taking her phones would feel like losing a limb, and she had been right about that. What she had not expected was what happened next. Graham's lead man, the one who had taken her phones, looked at the secondary device, turned it over, looked at it again, then looked at Graham. This isn't a standard phone, he said. Graham took it, looked at it himself. His expression went through something recognition, she thought, or calculation, the fast reassembly of a picture he thought he already had. Dead man trigger, he said quietly. He looked at Elara. You said a dead man trigger. Yes. When does it release? If I don't cancel it, it releases in. She glanced at the phone in his hand, though she didn't need to. 3 hours and 51 minutes. To who? She said nothing. Elara. To who? Someone who's been looking for the ownership chains for 8 months. Someone who doesn't need the complete picture to start making arrests. He just needs one more piece. Graham's jaw tightened. He looked at the phone again. He was running the same kind of calculation she'd watched him run for 6 years, not emotional. Never emotional. Just the cold mathematics of advantage and exposure, and which move left him with the most options. Cancel it, he said, no. If that evidence releases. Then Crow goes to prison, and you go to prison, and the structure you've spent years building gets dismantled, she said. I know. I'm aware of the consequences. You'd go down with it. Your access to Caldwell's files. I've already told Harrison everything. A lie. A necessary one, delivered without inflection. He's already cooperating. Graham stared at her. She held his gaze and did not blink, and did not breathe, and waited for him to decide what she actually was. Then her own lie partially collapsed on her, because Graham smiled. Not the satisfied smile from the beginning of the encounter. Something different. Something that made the back of her neck go cold. Harrison didn't know, Graham said. I can tell by the way you said it. He tilted his head. But that's almost beside the point now. Because here's what you don't know, Elara. Here's the thing I kept back. She waited. Silas's accountant Arthur, he found the drive here because I let him find it. Because Arthur has been feeding information to Bennett Crow for 6 months. Graham paused, letting it settle. Not under duress. Voluntarily. Arthur Bellamy is not a victim. He's a participant. She turned. Arthur was still beside her. He hadn't moved during any of this, not toward the exit, not toward Graham, just standing with his hands at his sides, and his face arranged into something she was only now reading correctly. Not relief, not gratitude, not shame, resignation. Arthur, she said. He didn't meet her eyes. Arthur. I'm sorry, said, quietly. Genuinely, she thought, for whatever that was worth. They had enough on me to put me away for the rest of my life. Crow found it 2 years ago and sat on it until he needed leverage inside Silas's organization. He swallowed. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice, she said. Her voice was very quiet. You made it. Elara. Did you set up the meeting? The warehouse? Did you tell Crow I'd come here tonight? He said nothing, which was its own answer. She turned back to Graham. Her mind was moving very fast, discarding things and picking up others, the plan she had built, the leverage she had calculated. Careful structure of her entry and exit, and the dead man trigger and the detective, who was waiting for information he didn't know, was compromised. Plan was broken. Not damaged broken, Arthur was the source. Arthur had been feeding Crow from inside, which meant everything Arthur had supposedly compiled and hidden, every document, every ownership chain, any of it could be manufactured. Any of it could be designed to implicate the wrong people, or protect the right ones, or send Detective Rourke down a chain that led nowhere useful. She was standing in a warehouse with cracked phone screens and a compromised ally and a dead man trigger that Graham now knew about, and 3 hours and 40-something minutes left on its clock. She looked at the situation the way she looked at a balance sheet that didn't balance. Find the number that's wrong. Start there. Arthur had betrayed Silas. Which meant Arthur knew enough about Silas's operation to have been useful to Crow for months. Which meant Crow knew the shape of Silas's organization in significant detail. Which meant whatever Silas had been trying to dismantle quietly from the inside, the unauthorized structures, the hidden ownership chains Crow had been watching that dismantling happen and adjusting accordingly. Silas didn't know that. That was the number that was wrong. Silas was outside this building right now, she knew. That they had planned it. He was a block away, with 4 men waiting for her signal, and he believed Arthur was a captive, and the drive was real, and the plan was intact. He believed all of that because she had told him Arthur seemed credible, and the warehouse seemed right, and the ownership chain seemed genuine. She had vouched for it. She was the error in his plan. Graham was watching her think. She could feel it, the familiar, nauseating sensation of being watched by him while her mind worked, the awareness that he was reading her face the way he always had, cataloging her expressions and filing them for later use. You understand now, he said. I understand that you've had more time to build this than I realized, she said. 11 months, he said, with a kind of pride that turned her stomach. From the moment I knew you'd taken the position at Caldwell. Not all of it went according to plan. He gestured vaguely at the room, a concession to chaos. But the foundation held. Bennett Crow. Bennett has been building this particular structure for 4 years. I came in at month 5. He needed someone who understood corporate law and had access to the right institutional networks. Graham shrugged. I was useful, and me. You were the key that was already cut, he said. I just needed to get you to Caldwell. That took longer than I wanted. You're stubborn. I'm stubborn, she repeated. You always were. He said it without heat, almost with affection. That was the most disgusting part, the way he managed to make ownership sound like admiration. Give me the cancel code for the trigger, Elara. I can't. You can, I literally cannot. The trigger is biometric secondary. Another lie. She was building them quickly now, stacking them like sandbags. It needs my thumbprint to cancel. If you take it and try to force a cancel without my thumbprint, it releases immediately. She watched him look at the phone, watched him decide whether to believe her. He wasn't sure. She could see that, and uncertainty was not something Graham was comfortable with. Then you cancel it, he said. In exchange for what? Your safety. Arthur's safety. Blackthorne's accountant, who I assume you care about for some reason. He spread his hands. Nobody has to get hurt tonight, Elara. That was never what this was supposed to be. What was it supposed to be? Business, he said simply. It was always just business. Something about those words, the flatness of them, the complete and unashamed reduction of 6 years, and a warehouse and a man zip-tied to a chair into a single bland noun, did something to the inside of her chest. Not broke it, clarified it. She had spent 6 years wondering if she was wrong about Graham. Wondering if she'd missed something, misread something, if the version of him she'd fallen for was real, and the version she'd fled was the aberration. She had spent 18 months after leaving him picking through the wreckage of her own certainty, testing everything she thought she knew about her own judgment. Business. That was the answer to all of it. Not love corrupted. Not a man who had lost his way. Just business, conducted on her, for years, with her consent never relevant to the calculation. She felt something settle inside her. Not peace, this was not a peaceful moment, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop asking a question because you finally have the answer. No, she said. Elara, no, she said again. I'm not canceling the trigger. And here's why. Because even if you take my hand and force my thumbprint onto the screen, the server has a secondary failsafe that releases if the cancel is logged from inside a building with this GPS signature. She held his gaze. I set it up before I came in, because I know how you think. Graham stared at her. He looked at the phone again. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the three men behind him. Then he looked back at Elara, and for the first time in 6 years, she watched Graham Voss realize that he might have miscalculated. The warehouse lights flickered. Not a power surge, too deliberate, too rhythmic. 3 short pulses. Silas's signal. He was in the building. Graham heard it too. She watched his head turn toward the south side of the building, toward the loading bays, toward the entrance she had not come through. How many, he said to his men. Unknown. The lead man was already moving. We have to assume. And then the lights went out entirely. Not flicker gone. The work lights, the mezzanine overheads, everything. Total darkness. The specific total darkness of a building with no windows in a waterfront neighborhood with minimal street lighting, the kind of darkness that turns distances into guesses and makes every sound enormous. Someone knocked over a metal shelf somewhere below them. Crash rolled through the space like thunder. Elara grabbed Arthur's arm. Not out of trust, she had approximately 0 trust for Arthur Bellamy at this particular moment. Out of practicality, he knew the mezzanine layout. He'd been here for 2 days. North stairs, she said, directly into his ear. Fire suppression panel, move. She felt him start to move, which was enough, and she moved with him, one hand on his arm and one hand on the railing she found by memory. Moving fast and quiet, in the dark, while the warehouse below them filled with sounds she couldn't fully interpret. And Graham's voice cut through the black air behind her, giving orders she was already too far away to hear clearly. They made the north stairs. They went down. The fire suppression panel was where Arthur had said. It was she found it by feel, running her hands along the north wall until she hit the recessed metal casing. She pulled it open, felt inside. The drive was there. She took it, put it in her interior pocket, against her ribs, the safest place she had. Then the emergency lights came on. Red, low, strobing at irregular intervals, which was worse than steady. The irregular rhythm made depth perception unreliable and turned movement into something choppy and hard to track. She saw Graham on the mezzanine above her. He saw her. He saw her hand coming out of the fire suppression panel. His expression, even in red emergency light, even from 30 feet below, she could read it, went from calculation straight through to fury, and the fury had a quality she recognized from the worst years of their relationship. Not hot, not explosive, but cold and total and entirely focused on her. He started toward the stairs. She grabbed Arthur and ran. The ground floor of the warehouse was chaos shapes moving in the red strobed dark, the sounds of struggle from multiple directions, a crash from somewhere near the loading bays, someone shouting in a language she didn't recognize. She kept Arthur moving, kept herself low, kept the north wall to her left as a reference point. She was looking for Silas. She found a problem instead. The east emergency exit, one of the 3 routes she had memorized, was blocked. Not locked, blocked. A pallet of shelving units had come down across the door, either in the fight or deliberately. She couldn't get it open with one hand, and Arthur's ribs meant she couldn't ask him to push. She turned toward the south exit. Figure stepped out of the dark directly in front of her. Not Silas. Not Graham. Someone she hadn't seen before, one of Crow's people, she thought, stationed somewhere she hadn't accounted for, which was exactly the kind of mistake you made when you planned something with incomplete information. The figure raised something. Elara did not think. She pulled Arthur sideways, behind a steel support column, moving on pure reflex and 6 years of learning to read the fraction of a second before something happened in a room. The shot, if it was a shot, the sound was swallowed by the chaos mist. She pressed her back against the column and breathed. Arthur was breathing too fast beside her. Not panic pain. The ribs. Can you keep going? Yes, he said. Then I'm sorry. For what I told you later, she said. She looked around the column. The figure was moving toward them. Slowly, systematically, the way a professional moved in a building they knew, and you didn't. But Elara had studied this building for 3 days. She knew one thing about it that most people in this room did not. The fire suppression release valve for the dry chemical system was on the north wall, 6 feet from where she was standing. She reached for it and pulled. The sound was enormous, a deep mechanical exhaust, like the building clearing its throat, and then the chemical cloud hit the air, white and dense and instantly blinding, rolling through the space with a speed that surprised even her, filling the warehouse floor from the ground up in great billowing waves that turned the red emergency lights into something almost beautiful and completely disorienting. A red-lit fog that swallowed shapes and distances and replaced certainty with nothing. She heard coughing, shouting, movement from multiple directions, none of it organized. She grabbed Arthur's arm again. "South wall," she said. "Count your steps. Don't stop." They moved through the white chemical fog, blind and coughing, and somewhere in the building behind them she heard Graham's voice, still giving orders, still trying to run something that had already run away from him, and somewhere ahead of her. Through the fog and the red light and the sound of chaos, she heard a voice she recognized. Silas, close, moving toward her. She kept her hand on Arthur's arm and her other hand in front of her, and she walked forward into the white and the red and the wreckage of everything that had gone wrong tonight, carrying a hard drive against her ribs and 3 hours of time on a dead man trigger and the particular cold clarity of a person who has run out of plans and is now operating on something older and harder and less articulable than planning. She walked forward because there was no other direction. And through the fog, a hand found her arm, large, steady. The grip of someone who had been looking for her and had not stopped looking. She grabbed back. The hand that found her in the fog was Silas's. She knew it before she could see him. The grip, the particular steadiness of it, not clutching but holding, 2 different things. He pulled her forward, and she came out of the chemical cloud, coughing, eyes burning, Arthur stumbling behind her with one hand on her shoulder. The south wall. They were at the south wall. Silas had a cut above his right eyebrow that was bleeding freely, a dark line running down into his eye that he hadn't bothered to address. He looked at her face, first checking, she understood, not possessively, just the fast inventory of someone confirming that a person he was responsible for was intact. Then he looked at Arthur. His expression did something complicated. "He knows," Elara said before Silas could speak. "About Arthur. Graham told me." Silas looked at Arthur for 3 seconds. Arthur didn't look back. "The drive," Silas said. "I have it." She pressed her hand against her interior pocket. "North wall, fire suppression panel. Arthur hid it there before they brought him in," she paused. "Or it was placed there for us to find. I don't know which yet. Does it matter right now? It matters for what we do with it." She was still coughing, short controlled bursts that tasted like chalk and chemical. "We can't give it to Rourke until we verify the chain. If Crow's people manufactured any part of it, we verify later. First we get out," she almost argued. Then she heard something from the direction of the mezzanine movement, fast and deliberate, coming toward the stairs, and stopped arguing. Silas's 2 men materialized from the chemical haze to their left. She hadn't seen them enter. She had no idea how long they'd been inside. They moved in the tight, practiced way of people who had done this in worse conditions than a fogged warehouse with red emergency lighting, which was not a reassuring thing to think about, and also oddly steadying. "East exit is blocked," she said. "Shelving came down. West loading bay is compromised. Crow has 2 people on the exterior." Silas looked at his men. "South? 1 man down, 1 unaccounted for. The unaccounted one is inside somewhere," Elara said. "He came at us from the south, before I hit the suppression valve." Don't know where he went. Silas's jaw tightened. He pulled her sideways behind a steel rack that had partially survived the suppression cloud and crouched low. She crouched with him. Arthur moved slower, one hand pressed to his ribs, face pale in the red light. How many did Graham bring in total? Silas asked her. I saw 3 on the mezzanine with him, plus whoever was already here before I arrived. So we have at minimum 2 unaccounted for inside and 2 on the exterior west. And Graham. He looked at her. Did you run the trigger status before they took your phones? I canceled it when they took the devices. I had time. The window reset. She checked her internal clock, the one she'd been running since she walked in, 2 hours and 40 minutes before the next release threshold. Enough time to get out and cancel properly. We get out. We're getting out. She looked at him. The blood from his eyebrow had reached his cheekbone. He didn't seem to notice it. You should have told me Arthur was questionable, she said. I didn't know Arthur was compromised. You suspected. A beat. I had a doubt 1 week old. Not enough to act on. Enough to tell me. His jaw moved. Yes. Enough to tell you. We'll fight about it later, she said. Yes. That was what passed for agreement in a warehouse full of chemical fog and armed men, and it was enough. One of Silas's men, the one closer to the south wall, raised a fist. Signal. Elara had been briefed on the signals. Someone was moving south-southeast toward their position. Silas shifted his weight. Elara looked at Arthur. Stay behind the rack, she said. Don't move. Don't talk. He nodded. He looked smaller than he had 2 days ago in Silas's office when Silas had described him as the best financial mind he'd worked with in 11 years. She didn't have space to feel anything about that right now. She filed it. The movement from the south resolved into a shape the unaccounted figure from before, the one she'd pulled Arthur away from. He was moving carefully through the residual chemical haze, weapon raised, using the fog as cover in both directions. Professional. Patient. The kind of patience that came from training rather than temperament. Silas's second man came from the east, silent and low. The figure never heard him. It was fast and ugly, and not anything like the choreography of film. There was a struggle, brief and intense, the specific brutality of 2 people trying to control at the same time. Something metal hit the concrete floor. Someone's breath left them in a sharp percussive exhalation. Then silence. Silas's man stood up. The figure on the floor didn't. Elara breathed. Her heart was doing something it had been doing since she walked into this building, not racing. Exactly, but elevated, steady, the rhythm of a body that understood the situation and was handling it without her permission. She had expected fear and gotten something more functional. She wasn't sure what to call it. She stood up from behind the rack. We move now, Silas said, before Graham regroups. They moved. The south exit was a fire door with a push bar that had been taped over at some point and then untaped, the remnant adhesive still on the metal. It opened outward into a narrow access alley between the warehouse and the next building, barely wide enough for 2 people side by side, the ground uneven with old loading dock equipment and the smell of the waterfront cutting through the chemical residue that clung to all of them. Cold air, salt, the distant sound of the harbor. Elara's eyes adjusted. The alley was dark, but not the absolute dark of the warehouse interior. There was ambient light from somewhere north, the glow of the city doing its permanent thing, and she could see the shapes of things, even if not their details. Arthur made a sound when the cold air hit him. Short, involuntary, the ribs, she thought, the cold contracting, something that was already damaged. How far? She asked Silas. Vehicle is 1 block north. My other 2 men are on the perimeter. I need to signal them, or as they hold position. Signal them. He made a sound with his mouth, too short, specific, the kind of sound that doesn't carry far, but carries exactly as far as it needs to. 40 feet north of them, something shifted in the dark. They moved. Elara had Arthur's arm on one side, and Silas 1 step behind on the other, moving at the pace of a man with cracked ribs who was trying to keep up with people who needed to move faster than that. The alley was 40 feet long, and it felt like 400. They were 20 feet from the end of it when the door behind them opened. She didn't turn around. She heard it, the particular sound of that specific push bar, the resistance of the taped hinge, and she did not turn around because turning around would slow them down, and slowing down was not acceptable. "Keep moving," Silas said, quiet and direct. She kept moving. The shot came from behind them. Not aimed, she could tell by the sound, the angle, the fact that nothing near them changed. A warning or a badly aimed rush. Either way, it was loud and it was real, and Arthur made a different kind of sound than the one he'd made for the ribs. She turned. Arthur was still moving. She scanned him fast, nothing obvious, no new damage. He'd reacted to the sound, not the bullet. Silas had turned fully around. He was looking at whoever had come through the door. Graham. He was alone. That registered immediately, and she filed it with the part of her mind that was still running analysis. Even now, Graham had come through that door alone, which meant the men he'd had with him were either occupied with Silas's other team or down, or both. He had a gun. He was holding it with both hands, which told her he wasn't practiced with it, and he was breathing hard, which told her the run through the warehouse had cost him. The distance between Graham and Silas was 15 feet. 15 feet with a gun in a dark alley was not a situation that resolved cleanly. Elara let go of Arthur. Silas started. She walked back toward Graham. She heard Silas make a sound behind her, not a word, something shorter and sharper, the sound of a man physically stopping himself from acting. She heard it and kept walking. Graham watched her come. His gun was still up. His eyes moved between her and Silas and settled on her. "Don't," he said. "Don't what? Don't do the thing where you try to talk me down." His voice was tight. Not cold the way it usually, with something fraying at the edges of it. "I know what you're doing. I'm walking toward you," she said. "That's all. You're trying to get between me and Blackthorne. I'm trying to talk to you." She stopped 8 feet from him. Close enough to see the sweat on his face, the way the gun wasn't quite steady. "Graham, listen to me. Crow is not going to protect you. Whatever he's told you about how this ends, it doesn't end that way. You don't know. I know Bennett Crow spent 4 years building a structure designed to put someone else in front of it when it collapsed," she said. "I've read the documents, the ownership chains, the way every decision traces back to an intermediary who traces back to another intermediary who traces back to you." She paused. "Not to Crow, to you. Because you were careful to make yourself essential, and he was careful to make sure that if anyone looked at the paperwork, your name was on it and his wasn't." Graham's expression shifted. Something she hadn't expected, not denial. Something more careful. "That's not how it's structured," he said. "Then show me how it's structured. Because from what I can see, you're holding a gun in an alley while Crow is—" She stopped. Recalculated. "Where is Crow right now?" Graham said nothing. "Graham," she took one more step. "Where is Crow?" "He's not here. He was never going to be here," she said. "He never puts himself in the same physical space as the operational risk. The whole design. He advises. He builds structures. And when the structures get compromised, he's somewhere else, entirely. And there are documents that say it was someone else's idea." Graham's gun hand had dropped 3 inches. She wasn't sure he'd noticed. "Give me the drive," he said. But the edges of it were different now. "No. Elara, let me ask you something," she said. 11 months. That's how long you've been running this. And before that, 6 years with me. That's 17 years you've spent doing things that benefit Bennett Crow. Not yourself, not your clients, Crow." She held his gaze. "What did he give you?" Graham's jaw tightened. "What did he promise you that was worth 17 years? You don't understand how this world works. I understand exactly how it works. I've been reading your structure for a week." She took the last 2 steps. She was 4 feet from him now. The gun was still between them, but his arms had dropped further, not pointing at the ground but not pointing at her face either. "He promised you legitimacy. Entry into something bigger than you could access on your own. The kind of position where your name means something in the rooms that actually matter." She paused. "And instead you're in an alley, with a gun, in the cold, while he's somewhere warm." Something crossed Graham's face that she had never seen before. She pressed it. "Help us take him down," she said. "Not for me, not for Silas. For the 17 years. She heard Silas move behind her. Not toward Graham, toward her. A slight shift in position, weight redistributed. The movement of a man who was holding himself back from doing something that needed to not happen yet. Graham looked at her. She looked back. "What do you get?" he said. Quiet. Personal. Suddenly, the question of someone who needed to understand the transaction before he could make it. "I get my life back," she said. "Actually back. Not the version I've been living since I left you, which is just surviving. Actually back." Graham lowered the gun, not fully. Not to the ground, just down, pointed at the alley floor. Concession that wasn't surrender yet, but was moving in that direction. Then two things happened simultaneously, and the almost resolution collapsed. The warehouse door opened again, not the push bar. The main south exit kicked open hard and loud. Two men came through it, at speed, moving differently than Graham's hired contractors, moving with the specific, coordinated efficiency of people who had trained together and knew each other's positions without looking. Crow's men, the exterior team from the west loading bay, rerouted. And at the same moment, from the north end of the alley, an engine sounded close, then closer, then a vehicle turning into the alley entrance and stopping. Headlights cutting the dark from 60 feet away and pinning all of them in a flat white light that made shadows sharp and positions obvious and hiding impossible. Graham turned, Silas turned, Elara turned, the vehicle idled. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then the men from the warehouse started walking toward them, and the vehicle at the north end of the alley held its position, and Elara looked at the geometry of the situation. 5 bodies between her and the warehouse door, a vehicle blocking the north exit, 8 feet of space between herself and Graham, Silas 4 feet behind her. Arthur somewhere to her right with cracked ribs and compromised loyalty and knowledge she still needed, and understood that the alley had become a box. She looked at Graham's gun. She looked at Graham. "You have 2 choices," she said. Fast, quiet, meant for him, alone. "Walk out of this with us. Or Crow's people take the drive, and you become the only person left with your name on every document. You don't know they're Crow's. Are they yours?" He looked at them. His face answered before he did. "Then they're Crow's," she said. "And they didn't come here for you, Graham. They came here for the drive. And when they have it, you're a liability." The men were 30 feet away. Graham looked at his gun. Looked at Silas. Looked at Elara, 25 feet. "We need to move," Silas said from behind her. "Graham," Elara said. 20 feet. And Graham Voss, for the first time in everything she had known of him, in 6 years and 11 months, and this alley and all the years before she ever met him, made a decision that wasn't about advantage. She could see it happen, could see the precise moment when calculation stopped and something rawer took over. The moment when a man who has spent his entire adult life managing outcomes finally runs out of outcomes to manage. He turned and leveled the gun at the approaching men and fired once, not well. The aim was off, and the shot went wide, but the sound of it stopped them, dropped them sideways into cover positions, and then he turned back to Elara and said, in a voice she had never heard from him before, stripped of everything practiced and polished, "Move." They moved. Silas went first, 3 fast steps to Arthur, got a shoulder under Arthur's arm. Elara moved alongside Graham. They went north, toward the headlights, toward the vehicle that was still idling. The vehicle's door opened. One of Silas's men. His face appeared in the headlight wash, familiar, one of the 2 she'd seen at Silas's office, the one from the window side. He saw Silas, saw Elara, registered Graham with a look that asked a fast question. "He's with us," Silas said. Drive, they got in. All of them, crowded and cold and chemical smelling and bleeding in Graham's case, no, and Silas's case, the eyebrow still going. She hadn't had a moment to register that, since the alley and the vehicle moved, pulling back out of the alley and turning north and accelerating into the empty pre-dawn streets of Red Hook with the harbor behind them and the city ahead of them and nobody speaking for 30 seconds. Then Arthur said, from the back seat, "The drive." Elara put her hand against her interior pocket. Still there. Hard and small and worth everything they'd just done, and possibly nothing at all if it was compromised. "We need to verify it," she said. "I know a lab," Silas said. "Not one of yours. Somewhere neutral." He looked at her. "Neutral," she said again. He nodded. looked at his driver, said an address she didn't recognize. Graham was in the far corner of the back seat, gun now held loosely in his lap, not pointed at anything, looking out the window at streets that were starting to show the first gray suggestions of morning. He hadn't spoken since the alley. He had the particular stillness of a man in the process of understanding that everything he'd built, in the direction he'd been building it, was done. Arthur was next to Graham, not looking at him, looking at his own hands. Elara sat in the middle row and turned to look forward and let the city move past the windows and felt, in her body, the accumulated cost of the last 3 hours, the chalk in her throat, the burning in her eyes, the tension across her shoulders that had been there since she walked through that loading door and was only now beginning to acknowledge itself as exhaustion rather than readiness. Her hand was still against her pocket. The drive was still there. She didn't take her hand away. Silas reached across and handed her something, a piece of cloth, clean, from somewhere. She looked at it. "Your neck," he said. "Chemical burn." She hadn't noticed. She touched her neck with her other hand and found a strip of irritated skin just below her jaw where the cloud had gotten in on an angle. It stung when she pressed it. She took the cloth and pressed it there and looked at the road ahead and breathed. "The trigger," Silas said. 2 hours and 4 minutes, she said without looking at the clock. She'd been counting. "We need a phone." He handed her one. She entered the cancel sequence, felt the confirmation pulse. Reset the window for 6 hours. 6 hours, long enough maybe. Long enough to get somewhere, verify the drive, contact Rourke through a channel that couldn't be intercepted, and put into the detective's hands exactly what he needed to take down a structure that had been building for 4 years and running on her for 6. Maybe. The vehicle crossed the bridge, and Manhattan came into view through the windshield, lit and enormous and entirely indifferent to all of them. And the first true light of morning was starting at the edges of the eastern sky. Gray turning pink, turning something that hadn't decided what color it was yet. Graham spoke. "Crow has a contact inside the financial crimes unit," he said. His voice was flat and direct, the voice of someone giving information because it was the only currency they had left. Not Rourke, the deputy chief. Elara turned around. "Name," she said. "I need immunity first. You need—" She stopped herself. Breathed. "You need to understand that you're not in a position to structure deals right now. You're in a car. You fired a weapon in an alley. You've spent 11 months running a financial conspiracy through my employer." She held his eyes. "Give me the name. I give you the name. Rourke gets warned off. Crow walks. Not if we go around the deputy chief. Can you do that?" She looked at Silas. Silas looked at the road. "Yes," he said, not to Graham. To Elara. She turned back to Graham. "Yes." Graham looked at her for a long moment. Looking, she thought, for the familiar Elara, the one who second-guessed, the one who ran the filter, the one who needed his approval to trust her own certainty. Looking for a weakness he knew how to use, he didn't find it. "Harmon," he said. "Deputy Chief Daniel Harmon." She held the name in her mind and locked it there. "And Crow's location," she said. "Right now. Where is he?" Graham's eyes moved to the window briefly, then back to her. "He has a residence in the Flatiron District," he said. "But he won't be there. When operations go wrong, he moves to a secondary location. A service apartment in Sutton Place, registered to a consulting firm." He paused. "He doesn't know I know about it." "Why not?" "Because he didn't tell me about it. I had him followed. A beat." The first thing Graham had said in this vehicle that sounded like it cost him something. "I wanted insurance." She looked at him. "You were always planning to be the one left standing," she said. He didn't answer. She turned back to the front. The vehicle was moving north on the FDR, the river on their right. The city on their left, the sky doing its slow, inexorable thing, regardless of all of them. "Sutton Place," she said to Silas. "We go to the lab first," he said. "Verify the drive. Then we make one call to Rourke direct, not through the department system. I have a number. How? Rourke investigated my organization 3 years ago. We met. He's clean." A pause. Annoyingly clean. In different circumstances, she might have almost smiled at that. "The lab is 20 minutes, Silas's driver said. "Drive," Silas said. Elara pressed the cloth against her neck and watched the city move past the windows and counted the time on a clock only she could see, and in her interior pocket the drive sat against her ribs, small and hard, and potentially worth everything, or potentially worth nothing, and the morning was coming whether they were ready for it or not. The vehicle took an exit and moved west into the grid of the city's streets, and the last stars were going out at the edges of the sky, and Elara Whitcomb sat in the middle of a vehicle full of broken people, one betrayer, one man bleeding from his eyebrow, one man who had fired a gun and chosen a different direction in the space of a breath, and held the drive against her heart and did not look away from what was coming. The vehicle crossed into Manhattan as the sky was doing its slow, reluctant shift from black to the particular gray that preceded dawn in a city that never went fully dark. Elara sat in the middle row with the cloth pressed to her neck and the drive against her ribs and counted time on the internal clock she'd been running since she walked through the warehouse loading door. 2 hours and 4 minutes on the trigger window. She'd reset it in the vehicle. 6 hours now. Enough, maybe. She looked at the people around her. Silas, riding with the controlled stillness of a man who had been in worse situations, and was managing this one the way you managed any high-stakes problem, by not wasting energy on anything that didn't require it. Arthur, in the far corner of the back seat, hands folded in his lap, looking at nothing. Graham on the other side of Arthur, still holding the gun loosely, with the barrel pointed at the floor between his feet, looking out the window at streets that were starting to show the first suggestions of morning traffic. None of them spoke for a long time. The driver knew where he was going. The lab in Chelsea that Silas had mentioned, somewhere neutral enough to verify the drive, somewhere off the usual grids. It was Graham who broke the silence, and not with words. He shifted in the back seat, a small movement, and set the gun down on the seat beside him, with a deliberateness that was its own kind of statement. Not giving it up, just putting it down. Like a man setting aside a tool he'd finished using and wasn't sure he'd needed in the first place. Silas noticed. Elara noticed. Nobody commented. She looked at the drive in her hand. Small, matte black, indistinguishable from 1,000 other drives. Arthur had built a 19-month ownership chain on it, or most of one, and whatever Crow had fed him to complete the picture was either real or wasn't, and the next hour would tell her which. She was exhausted in a way that had moved past the body and into something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that came from sustained precision over sustained fear. She'd been running on exactness for 4 days, every word chosen, every move calculated, every contingency mapped, and the machinery of it was still running even now, still processing, still pulling at threads. Because that was what her mind did, and she'd learned a long time ago that fighting it was less productive than letting it run out. The thread it kept pulling at was Arthur. Not his betrayal, she'd filed that, categorized it, set it where it needed to sit. The thread was something else. The question of what he'd actually given Crow versus what he'd kept. The question of which parts of the chain on that drive were his work, and which were planted. And the downstream question of whether the ownership structure it described was real, or a version of real designed to close off certain avenues while opening others. She thought about Crow calling her, the particular confidence of that call. A man who believed the situation was controlled. That confidence either meant the drive was compromised and he knew she'd find it and hand it to Rourke as evidence of something designed to mislead, or it meant he'd underestimated her capacity to think around it. She pressed her hand harder against the drive and made herself wait. The lab was a converted office suite in Chelsea, 8th floor, a building with no signage and a buzzer code that Silas gave the driver from memory. The man who opened the door was in his 50s, reading glasses on his forehead, the expression of someone accustomed to being woken at unusual hours with unusual requests. His name was Vince. He took the drive without ceremony and disappeared. The waiting room had folding chairs and a water cooler. Elara sat. Her coat was still on. She didn't have the energy to take it off. Silas stood at the window. The city below was beginning to fill with early morning movement delivery trucks, the first commuters, the particular purposeful energy of people who started work before most of the world woke up. She watched him watch it, and there was something in his posture that she recognized as a version of what she felt, the quiet after sustained action, The body still alert, but the immediate necessity receding, the space where feeling was allowed to start catching up to event. Arthur sat with his water cup between his hands and his eyes on the floor. She looked at him for a moment. He was pale, and the cut above his eye had dried into a dark line, and his ribs were causing him pain she could see in the shallow, careful way he breathed. He had spent 2 days zip-tied to a chair and 6 months betraying a man who trusted him, and this morning he had compounded the second thing with a deception she had walked directly into. She didn't hate him. She'd expected to and found she didn't, which surprised her somewhat. What she felt was something more like grief, not for herself, but for the shape of it, the ordinary human tragedy of a person who had been leveraged and made choices under pressure and kept making them until the choices made them. Graham was standing near the door, not leaning on anything, not sitting, maintaining the careful uprightness of a man who understood that how he held himself in this room mattered to what came next. She understood that kind of maintenance. She'd practiced it herself for 6 years in his presence, the constant physical performance of composure for an audience of one. She looked away from him. 11 minutes passed. Vince came back with a printout. "Drive is real," he said. "Data is intact. Metadata timestamps, consistent across all files going back 19 months. He looked at Silas, then at Elara, with the equitable attention of a man who had quickly assessed where the operational intelligence in the room lived. "No manufacturing I can detect. Someone built this chain methodically. Every document has a legitimate origin." Elara breathed out. Something in her chest loosened. "The complete picture," she said. "What does it show?" Vince looked at the printout. Shell company ownership chains for 14 entities. 3 connect to a regulatory consulting firm in Delaware principal officer, listed as B. Crow. The other 11 terminate through 5 ownership layers in the same individual's beneficial interest. Also Crow. "Every failed acquisition," Elara said. "Every flagged transaction I can cross-reference from the public record. Yes." The money moved through. He glanced at Silas. Through a set of legitimate holding structures, was laundered across 6 transit entities and emerged as capital investment in Crow's beneficial entities. She looked at Arthur. "The 3 Crow entities. What portion of the chain did you build versus what Crow provided?" Arthur looked up from his cup. The answers took him a moment, not because he was deciding whether to give it, she thought, but because he was doing the honest accounting of it. "I built the first 11 independently," he said. "The forensic trail through the holding structures. I did that from legitimate financial records, bank correspondence, registration documents. That's all mine." He paused. "The 3 Crow entities, the direct connection from the transit layer to his registered firm, I assembled from documents he gave me. He said they were authentic. He said they were the missing piece I hadn't been able to find. And you believed him." "The chain to be complete," Arthur said quietly. "I'd been working on it for 4 months. When he gave me those 3 documents, they fit perfectly. Too perfectly, maybe." He looked at his hands. "I told myself that was because I'd done the rest of it right." The room was very quiet. "Vince," Elara said, "the 3 Crow entities specifically. Can you verify their registration independently? Not from the drive documents, from external sources." Vince nodded. "Give me 20 minutes." He went back into the inner room. Elara stood up, walked to the water cooler, filled a cup and drank it standing up, tasting chemicals still on the back of her throat. Filled another and brought it to Arthur and put it on the seat beside him without comment. He looked at it, then at her. "You don't have to." "Drink it," she said. She said it without warmth and without cruelty, the same way she said most things, and he drank it. She turned to Graham. He had been watching her. She met his eyes and held them, and the look he gave her back was different from any look she'd received from him in 6 years, or in the ballroom, or in the warehouse, or in the alley. It was the look of a man who had stopped performing. Particular exhausted transparency of someone whose machinery has finally run out of power to maintain the facade. She walked over to him. "When Rourke gets here," she said, keeping her voice low, "you tell him everything. Not a curated version. Not the version that minimizes your role or positions you most favorably for sentencing. Everything." "I know," he said. I need to hear you say it. Everything, he said. She studied his face. Looking for the familiar tells the slight tension around his eyes when he was managing her, the particular quality of his attentiveness when he was calculating rather than present. She'd learned to read those tells the hard way, and now she was reading him and finding something she'd never found before. He was just there, standing in a room at 5 in the morning after a warehouse and an alley and a decision he'd made that surprised them both, and he was just there, which was possibly the most present he had ever been in her vicinity. Why did you turn? She said. In the alley, you could have handed us over. Crow's people were close enough. You'd have walked away from this with your deal intact. Graham was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. And then quietly, with the reluctant honesty of a man who has been stripped of every more sophisticated option, I think I got tired of being the person who handed people over. She looked at him for a long time. That's not enough, she said. For what you did, it's not close to enough. I know, but it's something. He said nothing. She went back to her chair. Vince returned 22 minutes later. She'd been counting with a second printout that he handed to her directly. The 3 entities are real, he said. I cross-referenced against the Delaware Registry, the registered agent database, and 3 years of public tax filings accessible through the IRS disclosure database. All 3 are active entities. Crow's firm is listed as principal on all 3. He looked at her steadily. The documents Arthur was given were authentic. Crow gave him real documents. She felt the shape of that settle. Crow had given Arthur real documents because he'd needed the chain to be real. He'd needed it to be verifiable because intended for it to eventually reach law enforcement just in a controlled way, at a controlled time, through a controlled channel that he managed. A chain that pointed to him, yes, but a chain with Arthur's fingerprints on the assembly, with Silas's organizational structures as the apparent mechanism, with enough complexity in the transit layer that the investigation would take years, and Crow would have years to prepare. He'd been building toward discovery, just his version of it. What he hadn't built toward was this room, this morning, with a complete and independently verifiable chain in the hands of people who were calling Detective Miles Rourke directly, outside any departmental communication structure that Deputy Chief Harmon could monitor. She looked at Silas. He was already looking at her. Call Rourke, she said. Silas gave her the number from memory. She dialed. It rang 4 times, which felt like more. Then a voice, rough-edged, recent sleep, still wearing off the edges of it. Rourke. She talked for 4 minutes straight. No preamble, no apology for the hour, no softening of terms. She laid it out structurally, the way she laid out everything: entities, connections, evidence, witnesses, and at the end of it, I also have information about a senior official in your department providing advance notification of investigative activity to Crow's operation. Deputy Chief Daniel Harmon. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that she confirmed the call was still connected by checking the screen. Then Rourke said, "Where are you?" She gave him the Chelsea address. He said 20 minutes, which meant he was already moving before she'd finished the sentence, and hung up. She lowered the phone. Everyone in the room was looking at her. Even Vince, from the doorway of the inner room, was looking at her with the expression of a man who has seen a lot of things brought through his door at unusual hours and is quietly acknowledging that this one is different. 20 minutes, she said. Graham sat down. It was the first time he'd sat since they'd arrived, and the sitting had the quality of a conclusion, a man reaching the end of something and finally allowing himself the small mercy of not standing anymore. The 20 minutes passed in a specific quality of silence that Elara had experienced before. In high-stakes rooms, the silence of people who have said everything that needed saying and are now simply waiting for the next thing to arrive. Arthur drank his water. Silas remained at the window. She sat with her coat still on and looked at the printout in her hands and felt the particular strange flatness of a person who has been running at full capacity for an extended period and is now, slowly, becoming aware of the body again, the burn on her neck, the chalk residue still in her throat, the ache in her shoulders from the warehouse, and the chemical cloud and the running. Rourke arrived in 18 minutes. He was compact, mid-40s, with a face that had spent its career learning to read rooms quickly and spend no time on performance. He came with one other person, a woman in her 30s, who positioned herself near the door and introduced herself to no one. Task force, Elara thought, not department. Rourke was already routing around Harmon before he'd walked through the door. Rourke sat down across from Elara. Not across from Silas, not across from Graham. Across from her. He'd assessed the room in the first 15 seconds and made his determination about where the operational center of it was, and he'd sat down accordingly. Talk, he said. She talked. She went through it in structural order, the way she would present a financial case to a board, not chronologically, not dramatically, but architecturally. Here is the entity. Here is what it connects to. Here is the documented evidence of that connection. And here is how the connection was verified. And here is the witness who can speak to each component. 19 months of Caldwell Capital transactions, 14 shell companies. The money trail through Silas's legitimate holdings. Arthur's role stated accurately and completely, without mitigation or amplification. Graham's role the same. Crow's design as she understood it. The call she'd received from Crow 3 days ago. The warehouse. The drive. She stated her own role without apology and without excess. She had accessed files within her authorized scope. She had built a map from memory. She had entered a warehouse voluntarily, knowing the risk with a dead man trigger and a secondary phone, and the full awareness that the plan could break. She did not frame any of it as heroism. She stated it as sequence. When she finished, Rourke looked at the printout for a long time. Then at the drive, which Vince had sealed in an evidence bag at Elara's quiet request, while Rourkewitz was still in the building's elevator. Then he looked at Graham. "You're cooperating," Rourke said. "Yes. On the record, full cooperation. Against Crow specifically." "Yes." Graham's voice was flat. Not the flatness of resistance, the flatness of a man who has made a decision and is done negotiating with it. "I'll give you everything. All of it. The meetings, the documents, the instructions, the communication channels. Everything." Rourke looked at him for a 3 count. Reading him, Elara thought, the same way she'd read him, in the waiting room, looking for the performance, the calculation behind the stated position. Finding, apparently, the same absence she'd found. "My office will have paperwork for you within the hour," Rourke said. "Anyone from your firm, anyone connected to Crow's operation, or anyone inside the department until you've signed cooperation terms and have representation present." He paused. "You have a lawyer you trust?" "Not a firm connected to any of this." Graham thought. "My college roommate. Criminal defense. We haven't spoken in 3 years. Call him now. From a phone I give you." Rourke looked at the woman near the door. She produced a phone and held it out. Graham took it and moved to the far side of the room. Rourke turned to Arthur. "You," he said. "I want a lawyer before I say anything," Arthur said. "Smart. You'll get one." Rourke's tone was neither kind nor unkind, the professional evenness of someone who dealt with compromised witnesses regularly and had stopped having personal opinions about their choices. "What I need to know right now, before lawyers and paperwork, did Crow, to your knowledge, have any other active sources inside either Caldwell Capital or Blackthorne's organization?" Arthur hesitated. "Your lawyer isn't here," Rourke said. "You don't have to answer. But if there's an active source and someone gets hurt before we move on Crow's operation, that's a weight that belongs to whoever knew about it and didn't say." Arthur was quiet for 10 seconds. "There was one more," he said. "Inside Caldwell, a junior analyst named Park. I don't know how deep his involvement goes. Crow mentioned him once as a backup access point. He looked at his hands. That's everything I know about it." Rourke made a note. Then he looked at Silas. They looked at each other. For a moment, the history of a prior investigation between them, the mutual wariness of 2 people who have been on opposite sides of a table before and are now, improbably, on the same side of a problem. "Your organization's exposure," Rourke said. "I have 6 months of documentation on the unauthorized access," Silas said. "My forensic accounting team identified the transit mechanism in month 7 of the operation. I began dismantling the connections and documenting the process. I can provide the full record. You should have contacted law enforcement when you identified it. Yes, Silas said. Not defensive. I should have. I was trying to limit the reputational damage to my legitimate holdings while I understood the full scope. That was a mistake, a self-interested one. He met Rourke's eyes. I'm not asking you to overlook it. Rourke held his gaze. The prior investigation into your organization. 3 years ago. I remember, you were clean then, technically. A pause. You're being more straightforward now than you were then. Been a long night, Silas said. Rourke made another note. Then he looked at Elara one more time. Your access to the Caldwell files. I need the complete record of what you accessed, when and why. Every search, every document, every timestamp. I can give you all of it, she said. Everything was within my authorized scope. I built the map from memory because I didn't copy anything to an external system, and I didn't want a digital trail that could be accessed by someone inside Caldwell before I understood how deep the access went. She paused. The Junior Analyst Park, I'll go through my own observations of his work over the past 2 months and give you anything that reads differently with this new information. Rourke nodded slowly. Harmon. The name sat in the room. Graham has the detailed communications, Elara said. I have second-hand information. Graham told me the name in the vehicle. The communications evidence is his. Rourke looked across the room at Graham, who had finished his call and was standing with the phone held loosely at his side and an expression that suggested his college roommate had agreed to come immediately. Harmon, Rourke said to Graham, and Graham told him. He told it clearly, completely, with the specific detail of a man who had been keeping records on his own insurance policy for 2 years. Dates of contact. Communication methods, a secondary phone registered to a shell entity, messages deleted from both ends but logged in Graham's private encrypted file because Graham was, at his core, a man who documented everything against the possibility that he'd need it later. Meeting locations. The general substance of what had been past investigation timelines, subpoena schedules, the names of confidential informants in Crow's adjacent network that Harmon had provided over 18 months. Rourke's face did not change dramatically when he heard it. What Elara saw was the expression of a man receiving confirmation of something he'd half known and hadn't been able to prove, the particular grim relief of an answered question you'd been afraid to ask too loudly. How do you have all of this in your head? Rourke said to Graham. At 5:30 in the morning after a warehouse. Graham looked at him. I've been rehearsing it for 2 years, he said. In case I ever needed it. Rourke made a call, then 2 more. Short, direct, using individual names rather than dispatch codes, routing carefully around the department's central communication infrastructure. When he finished, he looked at the woman near the door and something passed between them in the wordless shorthand of people who had worked together long enough to have their own language. Crow, Rourke said to Silas. Sutton Place. You have eyes on the building. Since 4:15, Silas said. Nobody moves. Nobody approaches. My people handle it. He paused. If he shows movement. You'll be notified, Silas said. Immediately. Rourke looked at him. I'm going to hold you to that. I know you are. Rourke and the woman moved into the inner room with Vince. The door stayed open. She could see them working. The woman on a phone. Rourke looking at the drive documentation. The methodical assembly of a case that had been 4 years in the building and was now in this converted Chelsea office at 5:30 in the morning, starting to close. The room rearranged itself around their movement. Graham found a chair and sat in it with the posture of a man who had used up every resource and was running on the last of something he couldn't quite name. Arthur leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Not sleeping, she could see the tension in his jaw, the shallow breathing of cracked ribs and accumulated stress. Just resting his eyes against the brightness of the room. Silas crossed to where she was sitting. He sat down beside her. Not across beside, the particular choice of proximity that meant something different than face-to-face. He sat down and didn't say anything, which was exactly right, and she sat beside him and also didn't say anything, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The cut above his eyebrow had been bleeding again in the vehicle. It had slowed but not stopped, and someone Vince, she thought quietly, when she hadn't been paying attention, had put a strip of closure tape across it that was doing most of the work. It made him look slightly incongruous, that small piece of medical tape on an otherwise composed face, and she was aware that she found it not endearing exactly, but human. The specific humanity of an injury that couldn't be completely managed away. Crow underestimated you, Silas said finally. He didn't know me. Graham told him about you. Graham told him the version of me he'd built, she said. 6 years of manufactured doubt. He described me to Crow as a lever. A useful one, but a lever. She paused. Crow called me based on that description. He expected to find someone manageable. What did he find? She looked at the window. The sky outside had shifted definitively from gray to something brighter, the first real light of the day starting to establish itself. Someone who reads financial documents the way other people read people, she said. And someone who'd spent 6 years learning that the worst thing that can happen when you stop being afraid is that you make a decision. Silas was quiet. I should have told you about Arthur earlier, he said. Yes, I had a doubt, week-old. I told myself it wasn't substantial enough. You told yourself it was protecting me, she said. You were protecting yourself from the possibility that if you told me, I'd step back from the whole thing. And you needed me in it. He didn't flinch this time. He received it. Yes, he said. That's the thing that almost got us both killed, she said. Not Crow's planning, not Arthur's betrayal, your withholding. I know. Don't do it again. No. She turned and looked at him directly. His eyes were level with hers, the same quality of attention he'd given her since the ballroom total, undivided, without the particular management she was used to from men who watched her. Not watching her to catalog. Watching her because she was worth watching. I need to know something, she said. Yes, at the gala. When you stepped in, you'd already identified me as a connection to Caldwell, to the investigation. Yes. Was stepping in, was any part of it strategic? Getting close to me. Getting access through me. He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was giving it the honesty it deserved, rather than the answer that was easiest. He had his hand on you, he said. You told him to let go, and he didn't. I moved before I thought about the investigation. He held her eyes. The investigation was there too. I'm not going to tell you I forgot about it. But it wasn't the reason I moved. She looked at him for a long moment. I believe that, she said. I know you do, he said. You wouldn't have said it if you didn't mean it. The arrest of Bennett Crow happened at 6:47 in the morning. Sarah was still in Chelsea giving a statement to Rourke's task force officer when Silas received the notification from his man on Sutton Place. He didn't interrupt her statement. When she'd finished and was signing the documentation, he told her, quietly, his voice even, as though he were reporting a weather condition. They have him. She looked up from the paper she was signing. He answered his door, Silas said. Dressing gown. He didn't run. She thought about that for a moment. A sound like green wood splitting. Crow, who had spent 4 years building a structure designed to put someone else in front of it when it fell, standing in his own doorway in a dressing gown while the structure fell on him instead. Harmon, she said, pulled in separately, an hour ago. Rourke's team, not the department's regular units. She nodded, set the pen down, looked at the signed statement in front of her, 3.5 pages of precise dated, sequential accounting of everything she'd found and done and witnessed. She felt not triumphant. She'd been expecting to feel triumphant and found something quieter and less convenient. The particular emotional aftermath of a thing going right after a long time of everything going wrong, not elation, but a kind of release. Like a pressure she'd been living inside of so long she'd stopped recognizing it as pressure. The drive went with Rourke's team, the original. She'd kept a photographed record of the key documents, not a copy, just photographs she could reconstruct from if needed. Vince confirmed the chain was verified. The task force officer confirmed the evidence log. Graham signed his cooperation terms in the presence of his college roommate, who had arrived at 6:20 looking like a man who had driven fast from Brooklyn in his work clothes and did not regret it. Arthur was taken separately. Different vehicle, different destination, different set of processes. He looked at Elara once before they walked him out, a look she received and didn't return immediately, just held for a moment, and then nodded, once, which was neither forgiveness nor its absence. Just acknowledgement that he was a person, and she knew it and was not going to pretend otherwise. He looked away first. She called Harrison Caldwell at 7:15. She didn't wait for the news to reach him through other channels. Called him herself and told him clearly, completely, and without editorializing, what had happened, what she'd found, what she'd done with it, the junior analyst Park, who would need to be addressed, the acquisitions that would need to be reviewed and likely restructured. Harrison was quiet for a long time when she finished. "Why didn't you come to me?" he said. "Not an accusation. Genuine. Because I needed to verify it before I could present it," she said. "And because I wasn't certain in the early days how far inside Caldwell the access went. Whether it stopped at the external advisory layer or whether it went deeper. And it stopped at the external layer. Yes, your organization is clean. The exposure was the acquisition advisory network, third-party consultants, who were being leveraged without your knowledge." She heard him breathe, the particular breath of a man who had been braced for something worse. "Park," she said, "junior analyst. I'll put together everything I observed about his work over the past 2 months. There may be nothing. Crow mentioned him as a backup, and it may never have been activated. But you need to know." Yes, a pause. "Elara. Harrison. I should have trusted you sooner." She could have said it's all right, or don't worry about it, or any of the gracious deflections she'd spent years offering to people in positions above her. She said neither. "Yes," she said, "you should have." Another pause. Then, "Come in when you're ready. Not today when you're ready." She said she would. She hung up. She went home. She took a cab from Chelsea to her apartment and rode it with her eyes half closed. And the city moving past the windows, doing its morning thing, school buses, coffee carts, the early commuters with their earphones and their particular contained energy, performing the ritual of getting somewhere. Indifferent to all of it. Indifferent to her, which she found deeply, genuinely comforting. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Kitchen table, the chair she'd been sitting in when Crow called her 3 days ago, the spot on the shelf where her paper map had been before she'd folded it and carried it and handed it to a task force officer who'd looked at it with the expression of someone watching a precise mind at work. She stood in the middle of her kitchen for a moment. Then she took off her coat, hung it on the hook by the door that she'd installed herself 6 weeks after moving in because the previous tenant hadn't bothered and she'd decided she wanted one, and went to shower. She stood under the water for a long time, let the chemical residue go, let the night go, pressed careful fingers against the burn on her neck and felt it protest and then subsided to something manageable. When she got out, she made coffee, stood at her kitchen counter and drank it while it was still almost too hot, looking at the print on her wall, the one she'd bought 6 months ago and never hung, that she'd finally put up 3 days before the warehouse. On an afternoon that in retrospect had felt like a door closing on one version of herself. She thought about Graham saying at the beginning. She'd turned that sentence over many times in the past few hours, in the vehicle and the waiting room and the taxi, and she'd arrived at a place with it that wasn't simple but felt honest. She believed him. Not because she needed to, not because believing him made the 6 years easier to live with. A sound like green wood splitting, but because the statement had the particular quality of something a person says when they're done with all the sophisticated versions and are left with only the one that's true. It didn't change what he'd done. It didn't soften it or excuse it, or make the 6 years something other than what they were. But it gave her a different relationship to the question she'd been carrying, was any of it real, and she was done carrying it. She filed it where complete things went, closed. She was tired in a way that wasn't fixed by showering or coffee, or the familiar comfort of her own apartment. It was the tired of years, accumulated, finally presenting itself, now that the immediate necessity of competent functioning had lifted. She sat down at her kitchen table and felt it fully, which was a choice she could have pushed through, kept moving, found the next task to organize herself around. She sat instead and let the tired be what it was, and didn't perform composure for anyone, because there was no one in the room. She thought about Silas's hand in the fog, The particular quality of that grip, not clutching, holding, two different things. She'd thought about that difference at odd moments since the warehouse. It was the clearest image she had of him, clearer than anything from the ballroom or the coffee shop or the waiting room, just a hand in chemical fog and red emergency light, large and steady, looking at her without stopping, looking. She got up and called her sister. Her sister Maya was 41 and lived in Philadelphia and had a particular gift for knowing when Elara was performing fine versus actually being fine, a gift that Elara had found alternately irritating and essential for the past 3 decades. Maya answered on the third ring. "It's in the news," Maya said immediately. No preamble. 6 separate outlets in the last hour. I'm okay. You're at home? I'm at home. Alone? Yes. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then tell me the true version. Not the one that edits out everything you decided was too much to put on me. Elara sat back down at her kitchen table. She told her. Not the structural version she'd given Rourke. Not the professional summary she'd given Harrison. The true version, the navy dress and the calculation she'd almost made, and taking Silas's arm and not knowing why, and the 4 days of building the map in her head, and Harrison's office, and Crow's call, and the decision to go into the warehouse, and the fog and the red light, and Arthur's face, and Graham's voice saying at the beginning in an alley at 5 in the morning, and the hand in the fog. Maya listened all the way through without interrupting, which was not her natural mode, but was what she offered when she understood that interrupting would break something. "The warehouse," Maya said when Elara finished. "Elara, you walked into a warehouse, I know, with a dead man trigger." "Yes, I know what I did. I'm not criticizing you." Maya's voice had the particular quality it got when she was working through something carefully. "I'm trying to understand if this is who you've always been, or if this is who you became." Elara thought about that for a moment. "I think I've always been her," she said. "I just spent 6 years being told I wasn't." Misa was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Elara heard her breathing adjust the particular sound of someone working hard not to cry, the specific effort of that, and the decision not to. They were alike in that way. The Whitcomb women did not cry easily, and never in the middle of something they were still inside of. "Come to Philadelphia," Maya said. "Not now when it's done. Come for a week. Sleep. Let me feed you things. When it's done," Elara said. "Promise." "I promise." She hung up and finished her coffee and went to bed at 8:47 in the morning and slept for 11 hours, which was the longest she'd slept in a single stretch in the past 4 years. She did not go to any of the proceedings. She gave her formal statement to the task force over the course of 2 sessions, both of which she entered, prepared with documentation, timestamps, and a precision of recollection that the lead investigator commented on, quietly, as he was walking her out of the second session. "I've done a lot of these," he said. "Most witnesses remember feelings. You remember sequences." She told him she worked in finance. He said that explained it. She decided not to tell him it didn't. It wasn't finance that had built that capacity. It was 6 years of having to track every conversation, precisely because the version of events she remembered was always at risk of being revised by someone else. Graham cooperated fully. The testimony he gave against Crow occupied 4 days of proceedings and was specific enough, documented enough, and internally consistent enough that Crow's legal team spent most of their energy trying to establish Graham's credibility as compromise rather than contesting the facts, which was itself telling. Graham's cooperation agreement reduced his charges significantly, but not to nothing. He would lose his license. He would serve time. He would not serve the amount he would have served without the cooperation, which was, in its way, the last transaction Graham Voss would ever structure. She didn't follow the specifics of his sentencing. She made her statement. She told the truth. She let the system do what systems do when they're actually working. Arthur's cooperation was narrower in scope, but sufficient for the purposes of the case against Crow. His charges were more complex, not because of the depth of his involvement, but because the question of coercion versus choice was genuinely murky in places, and the law, to its credit, took the murkiness seriously. She made her statement about him accurately and without editorializing in either direction. She described what he'd done and what she understood of the circumstances, and left the determination to people whose job it was to make determinations. She thought about him sometimes, not with anger by the time it settled, with something like sorrow for the particular human trap of being leveraged into a small compromise, and then another, until the compromises have you and you've lost the thread of the version of yourself who wouldn't have made them. She had been leveraged into a different kind of smallness, and she understood, in a limited but genuine way, how that happened to people. It didn't make what he did acceptable, but it made it comprehensible, which was not the same thing, and she knew the difference. Bennett Crowe was indicted on 18 counts. The trial was long and extinct counts, and generated a significant volume of financial press coverage that Elara read with the detached interest of a professional reviewing someone else's work. His legal team was formidable. Rourke's case was more formidable. Arthur's testimony on the internal structure of the scheme, combined with Graham's testimony on the legal mechanisms, combined with the documentary chain on the drive, combined with the independent verification of the ownership entities through Vince's external cross-referencing, combined with all of it, the case was, in the language of Rourke's task force officer, tight. She resigned from Caldwell Capital on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She sat in Harrison's office and told him she was resigning, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had known this was coming and had hoped he was wrong. "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about what I actually want," she said. "Not what I'm good at. What I want. And Caldwell isn't it." "Caldwell was the right place for the past 8 months," she said. "It gave me access and stability and a reason to be in rooms that mattered. But I was brilliant and invisible here." She held his eyes. "I'm done with invisible." Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He stood up and extended his hand, and when she shook it, he held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake and said, "Whatever you do next, do it like you walked into that warehouse. Because that's the version of you that belongs in front of something." She didn't know what to say to that. She said, "Thank you," and meant it, and walked out. The Blackthorne Foundation Board contacted her through an intermediary. Not Silas, she'd been told and believed, that he had removed himself from the process entirely. The intermediary was a woman named Constance Adler, the board chair, 70 years old and efficiently direct, in a way that Elara found immediately genuinely refreshing. "I understand you've been thinking," Constance said in their first phone call. "I have." "Good. Thinking is appropriate before you agree to lead a significant institutional restructuring. What did you conclude?" "That I'm interested. That I have specific conditions about scope and authority. And that I want 3 hours with your full financial disclosure before I say yes to anything." Constance was quiet for a moment. Then, Tuesday 9 o'clock. "Bring your questions." She brought her questions. Constance brought the disclosure. They spent 3 hours going through it, and Elara asked the things she needed to ask and declined twice to soften positions that mattered to her, and told the board, clearly, that the restructuring as she saw it would require authority she wouldn't compromise on and resources she wouldn't negotiate down from. The board offered her the position on Thursday of the same week. She accepted it on Friday morning, sitting at her kitchen table with mostly cold coffee in the apartment that was hers, in the city that had watched her put herself back together piece by piece. She texted Silas. 2 words, I said yes. His response came 30 seconds later. 1 word, good. She put the phone down and looked at the print on her wall and felt, for the first time in a long time, the clean, simple alignment of a person who is in the right place, doing the right thing for the right reasons. The months that followed were not easy. Building something genuinely new out of an organization that had been running on inherited structures and legacy assumptions required the kind of methodical, detail-intensive work that Elara had always been built for and had always been underestimated for doing. She hired people she believed in and gave them authority she meant. She had difficult conversations she didn't avoid, and meetings she didn't soften, and 1 board presentation she had to give twice before it landed. Not because she'd done it wrong the first time, but because the first time The board hadn't been ready to hear what was right. She and Silas saw each other regularly, not in any performed way, not in the careful choreography of two people managing how they appeared to each other. Just regularly. He came to the foundation's offices, sometimes, when she needed to look at something in the financial restructuring that touched his organization's transitional period. She went to his office sometimes when she had questions that required his specific knowledge of how the old structures had operated. They had dinner occasionally, on weekday evenings, in restaurants that were neither impressive nor attempting to be, and talked about the work and the city, and occasionally things that had nothing to do with either. She was doing her own accounting of it, the way she did everything, tracking the data points, building the picture. What she found was consistent. He was who he'd been in the ballroom and the coffee shop and the warehouse in the alley and the waiting room at 5 a.m. He was not the same person in every context, because no real person was, but he was the same in the ways that mattered, the non-negotiable ones. He backed her. He told her the truth. He made his case when he disagreed, and then he backed her. She was making her own case for him, slowly inside herself, not rushing it, not performing it for anyone's benefit, just building the picture from evidence, the way she built every picture. The foundation's new headquarters opened on a morning in late spring. She stood outside on the sidewalk and watched people arrive. Board members she'd argued with and brought around. Program staff she'd hired in the first wave of restructuring. Community partners who'd been skeptical and had come around to something more like cautious investment. Journalists who were covering the story of what the foundation was becoming. Silas arrived at 8:50. She saw him cross the street, and she watched him cross it. And she thought about the ballroom, which had been 9 months ago and felt like a different geological era. He stopped beside her. Beside, not in front, not behind. "How does it feel?" he said. "Ask me in 6 months," she said. "You keep saying that. I keep meaning it." She looked at the building. The new logo. The plants in the lobby she'd selected herself because she'd wanted the space to feel like something living. "Feels like mine." He nodded. He looked at the building and then at her, and the look was the same one he'd been giving her since the ballroom total, undivided, not managing her or cataloging her, just seeing her. She put her hand in her coat pocket, found what was there. It was green wood splitting. She'd bought it on a Tuesday afternoon in a small jewelry store, on a street she'd been walking past for months and had finally walked into for no reason she could have articulated except that she'd wanted to. She'd looked at everything in the case and pointed without deliberating. She took it out and looked at it for a moment. A ring. Plain, simple, a clean metal band. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that announced itself. She put it on her own finger. Silas looked at it, then at her face. "You're wearing a ring," he said. "I am. Whose is it?" She met his eyes. Mine, he understood. She could see that he understood all of it, not just the fact of the ring, but what the fact meant. That she had chosen it. That the choice belonged to her entirely, not to anything external or any version of herself, shaped by someone else's hands. She had bought it because she wanted it, put it on because she chose to. A sound like green wood splitting, and the choice had nothing to do with making a statement to the world, and everything to do with the quiet internal fact of knowing herself clearly enough to trust what she wanted. "I have a question," she said. "Yes, at the gala. When I took your arm," she looked at him. "Was that the first time you'd done that? Stepped into something like that?" He thought about it genuinely. "I've stepped into situations before. Operationally. Strategically." He paused. Someone's wrist like that, someone who'd asked to be let go and hadn't been. He met her eyes. "No, I hadn't done that before." "Why not?" "Because it's usually not my business," he said. "And because it usually costs something." "What did it cost you this time?" He looked at her steadily. "It cost me the kind of uncomplicated distance I was used to keeping from things that mattered." She was quiet for a moment. "You should have led with that," she said. "I know. Instead of the withholding. Yes, you're still learning." "Yes," he said, with the particular quality of honesty that had no defensiveness in it. "I am." She took his arm. Not because anyone was watching, and not because the situation called for it, and not because she needed steadying. She took it because she wanted to, and she trusted the want. and she had decided somewhere in the past 9 months that trusting what she wanted was the work, the daily, uncinematic, unglamorous work of a person who had been carefully taught to doubt herself and was choosing one decision at a time, not two. They walked through the door. Inside, the building was warm and full of the particular energy of something beginning. Voices overlapping, people finding each other across rooms, the sound of purpose assembling itself. She let go of his arm and moved into the room, because the room was hers to move through, and she had people to talk to and work that was already in motion. Silas stayed, not shadowing her, not managing her presence. Just present. In the room, the way he was in rooms, occupying the space without performing it. Available without insisting on being needed. She crossed to Constance, who took her hand and said something about the months ahead that Elara received and meant to honor. She spoke to 3 program directors and 2 board members and a journalist, who asked her to describe what she'd built here, and to whom she said, without pause, an organization that does what it says it does and pays what it says it pays and treats the people it serves as the primary stakeholders rather than the secondary ones. The journalist wrote it down. She was not the woman in the ballroom calculating exits. She was not the woman who had learned to make herself invisible so that the people around her could stay comfortable with how much she knew. She was not even the woman who walked into a warehouse with a dead man trigger and more courage than plan, though that woman in her and would be in her, and she was glad of it. She was what came after, what the surviving built when the surviving was done. What was there all along, underneath the manufactured doubt and the learned smallness and the years of being told that the most real parts of her were the most inconvenient. She was exactly, stubbornly, unrepentantly herself. The morning light came through the windows of the building she had helped make into something, and the room moved around her full of people doing work that mattered. And outside the city continued its permanent indifferent roar. And Elara Whitcomb stood in the middle of all of it, with a plain ring on her own finger, and felt not the Hollywood version of arrived, not the uncomplicated joy of a story that had forgotten its costs, but the specific, hard one. Quietly, ferocious satisfaction of a person who has come through something real and is still standing on the other side of it. Present in her own life, which had always been the only thing she was trying to get back to. And she was back.